Good morning, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the Senate Committee on Commerce and Labor for the 81st Legislative Session. Before we begin, please be sure to mute your microphone when you're not speaking to minimize the background noise. Madam Secretary, please call the roll.
Senator Hardy.
Here.
Senator Lang.
Here.
Senator Neal.
Here.
Senator Pickard.
Here.
Senator Scheibel.
Here.
Senator Settlemyre.
Here.
Chair Spearman.
Here. Thank you so much. Let the record show that all committee members are present. I want to welcome our audience that's joining us remotely and anyone who might be listening over the internet. Today we have a hearing on Senate Bills 291, 314, and 320. I'd like to take a moment to go over some basic housekeeping items. The legislative building is closed, as you know, for public safety to reduce the spread and infection rate of COVID-19. All of us, committee members, staff, and anyone else who is participating will participate either through Zoom, video conference, or by telephone. Don't despair. There are some ways that you, as members of the public, can engage with us and participate throughout this process. You can register to participate through Nellis, where you have an opportunity to testify on a bill or provide public comment during the meeting. Submit written comment to the committee email address or fax number that's listed on the agenda. Share your opinion via the legislature's opinion application on Nellis or by viewing committee meetings online through Nellis or the legislature's YouTube channel. If you want to register on Nellis, all you have to do is click the participate button near the committee meeting date and time. Fill in the required information like your name, the agenda item that you're interested in, and your position on the bill. Once you've done that, you'll see a confirmation screen and you'll receive an email with the phone number and meeting ID so that you can call the time of the meeting. Just a note that while registration is required to participate, it does not guarantee you will be able to speak. Similar to previous sessions, comment and public comment may be limited due to time constraints. And before we begin each segment, I will announce the time frame for against, and for opposition and neutral. It would be helpful that if you have already heard what you're going to comment on, it would be helpful for you to say ditto, because that will allow us to get more comments, more public comments on the record. When you're on the phone line, please pay attention to which bill is being considered and follow the verbal prompts. Our BPS staff will speak to you or will call on you by the last 3 digits of your telephone number. Detailed instructions for participating in committee meetings are available also on the help page, which is linked in the banner at the top of every page. If you need assistance with any of these processes or you'd like to receive electronic communications, electronic notification, you may do so by contacting committee staff, also listed on the email on the agenda. Any exhibits for the committee must be submitted in electronic format no later than 8:00 a.m. the day before the meeting. And our contact information can be found on the committee page in Nellis. In addition, any person proposing an amendment to a bill hearing by the committee must first talk to the sponsor and let them know you intend to submit an amendment. I will not entertain any amendments if the sponsor is not aware that you intend to do so. The proposed amendment must be submitted in writing 24 hours prior to the meeting. Please include the bill number, a statement of your intent, and your contact information. And when you testify, please remember to unmute your microphone and clearly state your name and the entity you represent. And this is very important. Speak clearly and please project your voice. I promise you that your microphone will probably not bite you, as my microphone won't bite me. So don't be afraid to get close to the microphone and project your voice. We have a lot of people who are listening to us over the internet or on YouTube, and when you do not project your voice, they cannot. Remember to turn your microphone off when you finish speaking, and a reminder to all those who are testifying that pursuant to Nevada Revised Statutes 218E.085, it is unlawful for any person who knowingly misrepresents facts when testifying before a legislative committee. A person who knowingly does so is guilty of a misdemeanor, and the chair or any of the committee members may request the testifier to submit documentation supporting their testimony. And committee members, during these virtual meetings, when we have an agenda item that calls for a vote, our committee will be using a roll call vote. So when the secretary calls your name, please answer yes or no so that there is no confusion. Also, if you have a question, please raise your hand through the Zoom application. We're approaching first House committee passage deadlines, which is April the 9th, and I'd like to hear all of the bills, or as many of the bills as we can. So I'm urging all who are presenting or who have presented, if you are waiting on amendment, please get a conceptual amendment so that we can work session your bill. Anything that comes before us after November the 9th will not make it out this legislative session. So please remember that. And finally, all exhibits received prior to the meeting will be available on Nellis Online. And so now let's begin with our hearing on Senate Bill 291. Senator Lang, please proceed when you're ready.
Thank you, Chair Spearman. Good morning. I am Roberta Lang, representing Senate District 7 in Clark County. And thank you for the opportunity to present Senate Bill 291, a bill that seeks to expand the practice of cosmetology by including the practice and licensure of master estheticians. I am pleased to be joined by Matt Britton, CEO of the National Institute of Modern Aesthetics, who will provide additional information about the practice of master estheticians. A little bit of background information. The aesthetic industry is swiftly evolving with technology advances such as cosmetic lasers and medical light-based devices, taking skincare and anti-aging to the next level. However, many of the newest innovation in skincare does not fall under the scope of the practice of the current Nevada aesthetics license. These new procedures use state-of-the-art technology, and the inability to license these procedures poses a problem for spas that want to offer these services and for the estheticians who want to perform them. According to the Associated Skincare Professionals, there are approximately 183,000 estheticians licensed in the United States. In addition, the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics expects that between 2019 and 2029, the number of skincare specialists licensed in the U.S. will increase by a full 17%, just to keep pace with the growing demand for aesthetic services. All states require estheticians to complete some type of education or training before they qualify for licensure. A few jurisdictions, the state of Washington, Utah, Virginia, and Washington, D.C., currently recognize a two-tier esthetician license with additional training and education in a master aesthetics program, or apprenticeships required to become a licensed master esthetician. The most typical route to achieving the required education is through a formal aesthetics program with an aesthetic school or school of cosmetology. I'd like to go through some sections of the bill. This bill is quite long, but Chair, if you'd like, I will provide the committee an overview of the sections. Sections 1 to 21 authorizes a registered nurse or master esthetician, respectively, to perform a non-ablative aesthetic medical procedure under certain circumstances and under the supervision of a healthcare professional. These sections also prohibit these professionals from performing any ablative aesthetic medical procedure. Sections 18 to 20 prescribe the qualifications for examination and to obtain a license as a master esthetician or an instruction of master aesthetics. And Section 26 provides that a person licensed as a master esthetician may be appointed as a member of the board. Section 22 requires the State Board of Cosmetology to adopt regulations prescribing a curriculum for a course of study in master aesthetics and sets forth certain requirements to be included in such curriculum. Section 25 provides that physicians and physician assistants and advanced practice registered nurses who engage in the practice of master aesthetics are exempt from the licensing and regulations required of the bill. Section 28 of this bill authorizes the board to issue a provisional license as an instructor to certain licensed master estheticians under certain circumstances. Additionally, Section 29 of this bill authorizes the board to issue a limited license to persons who are licensed as master estheticians in another state, which allows them to practice master aesthetics subject to certain restrictions. Section 30 establishes the fees for an examination as a master esthetician and as an instructor of a master esthetician. And Section 33 provides the fees for a license as a master esthetician. Section 41 of this bill requires a student master esthetician to complete a minimum of 10% of the total instruction hours before commencing work on members of the public. Section 42 of this bill revises provisions related to disciplinary action against holders of licenses issued by the board to a person licensed as a master esthetician or an instructor of master estheticians. Finally, Section 44 of this bill sets forth a process to allow the board to issue a license as a master esthetician to certain applicants who do not meet the requirements set forth in this bill, but who, number one, hold a license as an esthetician issued by the board on or before October 1 of 2023, and two, apply for licensure on or before October 1 of 2023, and three, meet certain other requirements. And Chair, we also have amendment from, I think I misplaced it. We also have an amendment from the Cosmetology Board making this not take effect until January of next year, I believe. And at this time, I'd like to ask Matt Britton if he would unmute his mic and give us some background information about master estheticians.
Yes, good morning. Thank you, Senator Lang and Madam Chair and members of the committee. Good morning. Thank you for this time. This is something I'm really passionate about, and I'll constrain that passion and be brief to the point about this. This is an exciting time for us. We actually, let me restate my name. It's Matt, M-A-T-T, Brinton, B-R-I-N-T-O-N, and I'm with NEMA, National Institute of Modern Aesthetics, and with that acronym is NIMA. We operate a school in the state, an aesthetic school, but also in addition to that, we train in these services and procedures that we're talking about all over the Western United States. And we've graduated and trained thousands of students. And this is an opportunity for our state, Nevada, to create a license that is kind of sweeping the nation. The more and more states look at this, they are creating this advanced aesthetics license. And this is something that these services are actually happening in the state. They're taking place, they're being performed, but they are being performed by practitioners and by technicians who do not have any licensing and who are not necessarily supervised. And we know this because our students who receive some of this training, who finish without any formal designation after receiving this training, can go out and take these jobs, and we know what's happening in the market. So this is an opportunity to actually pass some legislation and create a formal license around what is already happening, and to sort of demystify this and explain these services and procedures, as Senator Lang mentioned, include some exciting technologies that involve using at times FDA-regulated devices, FDA-regulated medical devices, to perform services like laser hair removal, laser skin rejuvenation, laser tattoo removal, skin tightening, skin lightening. There's also procedures to remove and actually address body contouring, remove fat. And these services and procedures are exciting and effective and being performed at this current time. But again, no licensing, no credentialing, and not necessarily any training is required to provide these. So this bill addresses that. And what this legislation will do is, in addition to the basic 600-hour basic esthetician license, adds an additional 600 hours of training in these areas. And to break it down, there are essentially two areas, two broad areas. The first being advanced aesthetics, which include services and procedures like chemical peels and microneedling, microdermabrasion. And then as you step forward, it also steps into an area that some states refer to as medical aesthetics or master aesthetics. And this area includes the use of these advanced devices. And this is the area where the legislation does intersect with the medical world. And I want to be clear that we have made attempts to reach out to the medical professionals and work with them on this. Some of those attempts have been unresponded to, and so we've moved forward with preparing this legislation, looking at best practices in other states like Washington and Oregon and Virginia, Washington, D.C., and put this together. We want to make it very clear that this acknowledges the need for medical professionals to be involved in this. When these advanced procedures involving the use of these devices are taking place, we need to have some sort of medical supervision and oversight. And this is not necessarily happening in the state. What this legislation does is it requires medical professionals designated as MDs, DOs, PAs, and NPs, those who have prescriptive rights, to oversee and supervise the operations. And there's a requirement that one of these medical professionals be available within 60 miles or 60 minutes to be in person, and to also be available immediately for consultation should the need arise. And that's an important piece that, again, in the state is not necessarily in practice. This is an opportunity to finally formalize what should be a proper and necessary supervision and oversight from medical professionals. Where this is working, where this advanced license is working, we see a robust medical aesthetic, advanced aesthetic, master aesthetic industry, where medical spas, laser centers, physicians' offices have clear guidelines around the proper levels of supervision, clear guidelines around the training requirements for the technicians. And this is a really important point. Even the best dermatologists, plastic surgeons, if they are overseeing and supervising, and even if they are on site at the time, if the technician is not trained, if the technician is not credentialed, as it is now, there's no guarantee that the procedure is being performed safely. There are times when even with the best screening, the best intake consultation with the best dermatologist, if that technician who goes into the room and performs the procedure is not properly trained to observe the clinical endpoints, to observe any complications and problems, significant damage can be done to the patient. And so that's why training, formalized training, a formalized credential around the actual technician is a really important step. And I want to also be clear that one major component of this legislation that really effectively excites us the most is this opportunity to create a formal credential, a formal license around the actual performance of these services. And it's, to be honest about it, this really attracts women. This is a license that women are interested in obtaining. And this is a license that actually leads to not just jobs, but careers. Jobs and careers in medical offices, in laser centers, medical spas. And I want to also point out that with the 1,200-hour requirement, this master esthetician license would allow, again, particularly women who gravitate to this, to transfer their license to any other state and operate with the same license. And that's really important for a lot of our students move out of state and their military spouses, and they have the ability to go to other states that recognize this license, or even if the hour requirements are lower in other states, this Nevada license would transfer to every other state. That's a really important part of this. And it allows many, again, whom are women, to find credentialing, a formal training, formal license that provides them access to stable jobs with benefits and provide careers for themselves. And that's a major component of this. It also gives the industry the ability to invest and expand, knowing the terms, knowing the rules, knowing what's required to enable business owners to operate safely and effectively. So this is something where we look forward to working with physicians despite attempts to collaborate early on. We're finally hearing from them now that they've seen this language, and we really relish the opportunity to sit down, talk about their concerns, work together with them. We also have a meeting scheduled with the rest of the school owners that are interested in this area, and we're seeking their collaboration. We really look forward to working with as many individuals as possible to get this right for the state of Utah. Thank you. Excuse me, Nevada, thank you.
Thank you, Matt. With that, Madam Chair, we'd be happy to answer questions from the committee.
Thank you. And I see 2 hands up, and if you're happy to answer questions, they will make you ecstatic. So we'll start with Senator Pickard, okay?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I appreciate that. I've got to say, number one, I think the Cosmetology Board is probably the best run board of all the boards we have in the state. And generally speaking, I know if this is something they're doing, they're going to do a good job with it. I'm also a little surprised at how much attention we spend on cosmetic, particularly non-invasive cosmetic procedures. I mean, we spent, I think, 3/4 of an hour talking about washing hair the other day. So I'd like to get a little better understanding of, particularly after the testimony that, we've got people all over the country apparently doing this without a license. Are there casual, I don't want to drop into hyperbole, but, are there lots of people being harmed by these unlicensed professionals? Because I tend to resist adding yet another license to which becomes a barrier to entry for people that want to earn some money. This sounds like it might justify it, but can you explain what happens if somebody doesn't have a license and what the harm is? How many people in Nevada have been hurt by or in any state have been hurt by these unlicensed practitioners, and why should we put up a barrier which acts as a limitation to yet another avenue of income?
I'll start with that. Thank you, Senator Pickard, and then maybe Matt can finish up. So the reason for this license is because as the industry has evolved, people are doing more advanced procedures. And so this license are for people that are going to excise, vaporize, disintegrate, or remove living tissue. And so as it's evolved to those kinds of things, I think that more training is applicable. And with the more training, you get a higher level license. And Matt, if you could just follow up on that and talk about what's happening from your perspective.
Yeah, great question, Senator Pickard. You're right. Deregulation is happening. Cosmetology is definitely not immune to this. In other states where we operate, they are by and large passing on deregulating this license, master aesthetics, because of the nature of the license, where the individuals who are receiving this license are learning how to use chemicals, FDA regulated medical devices. And these are substantive procedures that they're performing where there is real opportunity for harm. And you asked a question about insight into, is there a problem here in the state? Are there injuries? And that is an interesting question that I don't think any one agency would have insight into, because it is a largely unregulated area. So I would imagine so. Anecdotally, I can tell you, because we operate in multiple states, that the insurance rates we pay for operating in the state of Nevada are higher per procedure. And I am told anecdotally on the back end that has to do with the fact that it is unlicensed. And they are telling me anecdotally that it does have to do with the fact that there are litigious matters that are costing insurance companies money. And we have to believe that that has to do with the fact that the operators of these devices are unlicensed and sometimes not trained. And there is no one agency that can actually speak to this because they do not have any oversight. So yes, we believe that there are issues, there are problems, we just wouldn't know what they are. And to, again, to speak to the devices themselves, again, the FDA regulated, highly effective. And that's the other piece of this. If the technicians are not properly trained and don't understand the technologies available, consumers aren't getting very good treatments effectively. That's another point. When the actual operator is trained, not only in the devices, but also in the other aesthetic procedures. And that's why building a base on top of the basic aesthetics license makes sense, because those are all the building blocks to get to the higher services. The consumer gets a better treatment. The consumer gets a more effective treatment. And it also builds education and awareness, not only what's here today, but this is a massively expanding, rapidly expanding field where we're talking about all kinds of really interesting energies, lasers, lights, radio frequency, ultrasound, freezing technologies, sound technologies, microwave. And the future here is bright, very bright and exciting. And this is a great time for the state of Nevada to step up, start training in the basics, start training in the fundamentals so that we can expand with the new technologies.
All right, thank you for that. Mr. Britton, that leads then to two follow-ups, if I may. And that has to do with training and supervision. The training requirement here is 500 hours if you already have, I presume, if you already have a instructor license, 700 hours if you're a student instructor. But we require, in fact, we raised from 1,000 to 1,500 hours for addiction counselors. And they don't do anything that would physically harm the body. I'm wondering if this is, really enough. And then reading the opposition letter from the dermatologist, they think a dermatologist should be supervising, not a PA or a LPN. And what you're describing, if this equipment really is as dangerous as it sounds, maybe they have a point. Maybe we should be supervising with people who are a little better trained themselves. How would you respond to those two?
Yes, again, thank you. Excellent questions. Again, Senator Pickard. First of all, so the training requirements are a total of 1,200 hours, and that equates to about 8 months full-time schooling. And that is 600 hours for the basic and then 600 hours on top of that. If a student wants to come back and come back to school after having the basic license, it's an additional 750 hours. And you are right, it is hard to cover everything. But in that time, we have felt, because we've done this for a decade in other states, that this is a sufficient time to be competent, to learn what's needed to be competently operating these devices under the appropriate supervision. And if a student, there's a grandfathering clause in the legislation that would allow an existing licensee for a period of 2 years to come to a 75-hour training course, but they would already need to have certain time practicing as an esthetician. These are all things we'd love to address, but we have found, and other states have found, this is working in states like Utah, Washington, Oregon, Virginia, Washington, D.C. And we are also aware that we really want to keep the hour requirements and the debt load down. We just feel like this 1,200 hours has been effective. And addressing the feedback from the dermatologists, we love it. We would love to get to sit down at the table and talk about this. It's something we've done in other states very effectively, and we want to hear what they have to say. We've come at this legislation without feedback from them on the front end, despite the fact that we wanted it. Now we're getting this feedback, and it's great. It's a great thing. We relish the opportunity to sit down with them. We've come at this legislation already drawing some boundaries, already recognizing the medical world needs to be involved, and the boundaries we have drawn has put a line at what's called an ablative aesthetic medical procedure in the legislation. And that's where the devices become strong enough, powerful enough to do more harm. And so that's a boundary that has been drawn where a master esthetician could not cross. And that's important. Most states are doing that. So that boundary has been drawn with ablative aesthetic medical devices. And then below that, with the non-ablative devices, that's where the opportunities are with the proper training, the proper licensing, the proper supervision, we are seeing millions of these treatments performed in these states every year safely and effectively. And also, this legislation does call out for certain procedures, even non-ablative procedures, where a medical professional, MD, DO, PA, NP, would need to perform a screening consultation on the front end. It's important where the living tissue is altered, is the term of art in the legislation. So again, we're trying to recognize and actually be really smart about what these procedures are, and where it's needed, we've drawn a boundary that master estheticians cannot cross. And where it's needed, we're bringing these medical professionals into these locations, physically into these locations, and bringing them into the patient interaction on the front end to make sure that we're being careful and safe.
All right, I appreciate that. And I guess my concern too is that not all of these estheticians are practicing within a clinical setting where they would have the appropriate supervision. So it sounds like we would add another barrier to them, although that's probably a good thing. I'm not saying that that's a pejorative thing, but I'm a little concerned because it sounds like we don't have any data suggesting that people are actually being harmed by these things in any significant numbers, which makes me question whether or not we need a license for this. Maybe regulatory rules or limitations on existing licensees might be enough. But I see where you're going. I'm not completely antagonistic to the idea, particularly since we've got other licensees in other states, and transporting that license might be important. I'm going to need to study this a little bit more, but I appreciate your responses. And thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Vice Chair Neal.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So, well, a couple of questions. I have a question on Section 20. If you go to Section 20, line 17, sub C, it doesn't say that they should have a high school diploma. It just says that they should have completed 12th grade or its equivalent. So help me understand that. And then I have a question on on Section 21 and 22.
Matt Brinton, NEMA, if I could address that. That is existing language that is used for all licensing within cosmetology, that as far as I'm aware, it is a high school diploma or GED or some sort of equivalent. But that's something I can check into, or the board itself could address in more detail.
Okay, and then my second question from Section 21 is the language relating to, which is, you discussed this healthcare screening that's going on. And so what I was wondering for this section is, how many nurses specialize in what a dermatologist goes to medical school for? And how many PAs are out there who have the specialty that a dermatologist has in order to properly be screening in this scenario in Section 21?
Yes, Senator Neal, a great question. So that is a great question that we'd love to discuss with the physicians. And what's working in other states is drawing this boundary where they are allowing these mid-level professionals to perform these screenings, because with an understanding of medical information, understanding of medical charting, the questions being asked, those professionals can be trained to properly screen for the necessary contraindications to effectively screen out. And what's important is these professionals know what they don't know as well. And if there are skin conditions where a dermatologist will be needed to consult, then that is happening. That is something we could work into the legislation, some formal provision there, but mid-level professionals are already doing this in their practice anyway. They require some level of supervision, some affiliation with physicians, and we see this working in other states where they know what they know. They can be trained to do an effective job in these consultations, and they know what they don't know, and they can refer to dermatologists where that would be needed in that pre-screening treatment.
Thank you for that. And then, Madam Chair, my last question on section 22, it is from the lines 30 through 32. So this is the curric for a master esthetician. And so what it literally says, and the use of an automated external defibrillator. And I think what raises the concern for me is I get CPR, right? But you're extending beyond that in terms of a skill set that the proper use of, because I'm assuming a defibrillator is exactly what I think it is. You think that there is a cardiac arrest, you're getting ready to place those metal pieces on their chest. Is that what that is? Because that's what I think it is.
Yeah, Madam Vice Chair, great feedback as well. And this is standard training language that has been drawn from other states. There are some standard master aesthetic training curricula that a number of companies have developed, and this is standard language, standard training that has been drawn from that. But yes, I believe that is exactly what it's talking about, where training in these modalities, including CPR, is an important piece of this. And some of these medical spas, laser centers, physicians' offices do have this equipment, and these technicians need to understand what the equipment is and how it can be used safely.
So, but are we suggesting that they actually use it? Because that I have a super problem with, whether they get the training or not. They are not a doctor. They will never be a doctor. Even if they do 2,200 hours, they won't be. And so I really want to try to understand that because, you know, you have in that section, you have the defibrillator, and then you also have trying to understand what an autoimmune disease is. And that is a little bit more specialized to me. And a nurse may not be able to really, I think, really deal with what could be an underlying condition there. And so I'm just trying to get super understanding. I get the competition argument, but I don't, these sections are problematic for me, or those phrases.
Yes, thank you again, Matt, Brent, and Nima. We really look forward to sitting down with the dermatologists to go through this, with the physicians to talk about this and address if they have concerns in this area. And these are definitely items that are up for discussion and revision if necessary.
Yeah, and I want to be super clear. I'm not referring to CPR, right? I'm referring to the defibrillator. You know, you do CPR as a lifeguard. I did it. I'm talking about the defibrillator and the use of it. So I just want to be super clear that you need to, when I say I'm segmenting this sentence out, to talk about the defibrillator.
That's excellent feedback. Thank you, Vice Chair Neal.
Senator Hardy, and then I think I saw Senator Scheibel and then Senator Settlemeyer.
Thank you, Madam President. Obviously, this is complicated. I mean, from a medical standpoint, I'm looking at lasers and age spots versus melanomas and seborrheic keratoses versus squamous cells. And then I read in section 1, I didn't get any further than section 1 before a red flag went up. The healthcare professional that's defined in NRS 453C.050 or .030 is a physician, a physician assistant, or advanced practice registered nurse. So the advanced practice registered nurse can have autonomy. The physician assistant at this point is still under the supervision of a physician. So the physician assistant who's going to supervise this is supervised by a physician. And So there's a chain of command or responsibility there. And the advanced practice nurse practitioner, I don't know if you're aware of it, but nurses heretofore have not really been anxious to be supervised by a physician assistant. And so from a logistics standpoint, that's a challenge. So from my medical standpoint, I would be willing to be in a room where this discussion took place between doctors and physician assistants and nurses. I've already made everybody upset and in one way or another in all of those groups. But I think there needs to be literally a room where this can be vetted out and done, because there are some challenges with this. And while I'm at it, it's my understanding, and I haven't been able to digest this as much as I would like, in order to be a master esthetician, you have to be a cosmetologist first, or is this bypassing the cosmetology training completely, and as well as creating a brand new board? Multiple questions there.
Matt, could you answer those?
Yes, thank you, Matt, Brent, and Nima. Thank you, Senator Hardy. Yes, great questions. Again, we look forward to sitting down with the physicians. It's taken seeing this language to get them to come to the table, but we really look forward to that opportunity to talk about their concerns, if there are any, around the individual practitioners and the levels, the mid-level practitioners. Regarding the terms, so cosmetology is the broad umbrella that covers all of this. I mean, years and years ago, cosmetology was the only license, and slowly it has been segmented where practitioners can specialize in cutting hair and barbering, in aesthetics, in nails. And so, yes, the aesthetics, an esthetician, master esthetician would fall under the broad umbrella of cosmetology, but a student that goes to school for 600 hours to earn the aesthetic license is an esthetician, and the 1,200 hours for a master aesthetic license is a master esthetician.
So
Does that address?
if I could just clarify that, is every one of these people that are going to be a master esthetician have a cosmetology license that's not limited to nails or shampooing hair? Do they have the license that includes everything? Do they have
No.
that have included everything to have a cosmetology license?
So Matt, Brent, and Nima, no. So a student who'd go to school to earn the aesthetic or a master aesthetic license would earn only those licenses and would not be able to work on nails or cut hair. It's a specialized license that deals with skin.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Senator Scheibel.
Thank you, Chair Spearman. I just had a quick comment for the benefit of the members of the committee about the CPR and the use of the automated external defibrillator. I'm not sure if this is standard practice, but I know when I received my CPR certification in the past 2 years, they included training on the use of the AED. So I think that there are people who train in both of them, and it is possible to get certified to use the AED even without being a medical professional. And also, if you ever have the need for someone to operate an AED, I'm here in the building.
Thank you. More news you can use. Senator Settlemyre.
Thank you, Chair. I appreciate the ability to ask a question. My concern is that by calling someone a master esthetician, the general public is going to feel that these individuals have the ability, I think, it's going to lead people to believe they have the ability to diagnose skin conditions where, to my knowledge, they don't have that ability. They don't have the ability to do screenings. How are we going to make sure that the general public knows they need to consult a doctor potentially about a problem? I mean, some of these estheticians do some great work removing tattoos and helping people out with skin problems and conditions, but how do we make sure of that?
Yeah, Matt, Brent, and Nima, thank you, Senator Settlemyre. Yes, great question. And that, of course, recognizes the fact that currently in the state of Nevada, no license, no training is necessarily required to operate these devices. And this is an attempt to bring a level of training to what is already happening. And in the course of study, building on what is the basic esthetician curriculum, where the students are already learning about the skin and skin anatomy and skin conditions and how to recognize various skin conditions, to even perform facials and to wax. That education starts at the beginning. This would build on that. And you are right, that's really good feedback, because these are intersections with a medical world, and it is important. That's why the training is that much more important. And most of the training involves trying to recognize when you need additional assistance with these items. And a lot of that comes from what I already mentioned, the type of device being used. So these ablative devices are outside the scope of this license. And these ablative devices are where you would really get into trouble with a pre-existing condition, like using an ablative device to go over top of a cancerous lesion. That could be a problem, and that's why we feel it's important to draw that boundary. Right now in the state of Nevada, no license is required to perform an ablative procedure with these devices. No supervision is necessarily needed. So we have a problem. You are highlighting the problem, exactly. We're trying to bring a measure of training and credentialing around it so that we do have some training to know essentially what we don't know. And that's being able to figure out, okay, what device am I using? I can't touch these ablative devices. That's a good thing. And to say where I am using devices like an IPL, I can get way in the weeds on this, but I'll try and keep it simple. Using a tense pulse slide, an IPL device, that is a less aggressive device. But what this legislation calls for is a screening with that type of device, where a mid-level professional or a physician could then have the higher training needed to identify potential contraindications and know how to screen, how to potentially refer to a more experienced practitioner like a dermatologist. So that is the nuance in this bill, that we're trying to create legislation that opens the doors to this opportunity for training, yet train these individuals in that 1,200-hour course of study. We have found successfully in multiple states that is sufficient time to train in how to use these devices, train in how to recognize enough of the skin issues to know when help is needed, when a referral is needed. And then for these devices that are more innocuous and not quite as strong, that's where the contraindications, where there are lasting problems, are less likely. And these are the less invasive, typically non-laser devices that can be operated successfully independent of a face-to-face pre-treatment screening.
I appreciate that discussion. You indicated that I brought forth the need for legislation, but in that respect, what data is out there? What information do you have? How many problems were reported or were verified? A lot of times people have a problem, where they say that potentially, like in cosmetology, that the person did wrong and their hair got superheated because they didn't do the dye job correctly, something of that nature. So there are people that complain, but how many verified cases, how many proof that we actually have a problem within this field have occurred in the states that have passed this legislation? What type of reduction did they see between proven problems, and by having the legislation go into effect, what type of reduction have they seen?
Great question, Matt, Brinton, Nima. Again, without any regulatory supervision or oversight, I think it would be hard for the state of Nevada to put their finger on that number. There's anecdotal evidence, like I can say from our actual operations, that it is more expensive for us to operate in the state of Nevada. And I'm told that is because of the fact that these treatments that there's no license required and no training required. And that's all I can say about Nevada. It would be great to have an agency that actually oversaw this and could have regulatory insight and would know about the problems. But having practiced in this industry we also own medical spas for 17 years, we can tell you that training, licensing is a critical part of an effective a treatment, not just for problems and complications, but also for giving consumers a beneficial treatment that they're paying a lot of money for. So this is not just about consumer safety. That is a huge part of it, but it's also about the opportunity to grow this industry, to educate the practitioners, and also to create meaningful jobs and meaningful licensing that allows those practitioners to transfer to other states that actually means something on a resume as this industry continues to grow explosively.
Appreciate that. I guess I just look at the viewpoint of the government is to protect the people. And that's primarily, to me, what the job of government should be, not trying to get involved in business. Business has a great way of dealing with itself. In fact, most businesses thrive if only government would get out of the way. So, I don't know, I just have some concern. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Additional questions, committee members? Thank you. So I have just a couple of questions, and I guess I will start where my colleague just ended with respect to some of the regulations, and maybe I will use an equivocation of one of the cars, American-made cars, about 20 years ago, had a problem with the way that the gas tank was designed on the car. And so if someone ran into the back of the car, it would immediately explode. And we did not know that until there had been a few people that had been killed. So let me start there. This is happening already in Nevada. Yes. There are estheticians. Yes. Do we know what type of training they receive? Do we know what the quality of the training, if any, that they receive? Do we know that?
No.
Okay. So I guess here's my question. And so far I have not heard anyone mention whether or not this is something that benefits combat veterans or veterans in general. And I was just on the internet looking up some things, and this appears to be one of those careers that you can use your GI Bill for.
Yes.
Unlike barber school, where right now you can't use your GI Bill. So the training for an esthetician is how much? What are we looking at in terms of cost?
Matt Brenton, NEMA, costs for tuition, we are seeing in the range of $13,000, $14,000, $15,000, $16,000, $17,000. And yes, we have students right now at our school in Utah on the GI Bill. We have spouses, military spouses on the GI Bill. You're correct.
And so I heard you mention something that the license are portable. So does that mean that right now anyone who is an esthetician in Nevada without some type of regulation can go to another state, a military spouse can go to another state and immediately start practicing? Or would they need some type of training?
Correct, Madam Chair. Matt Brenton, NEMA. You are correct. So the students that we train and have trained in other states, Washington and Utah, we have seen transfer licenses to, I think the count is 37 other states. Now, that wouldn't necessarily equate to a master esthetician license where that state does not recognize that level. But where the state does, we are not aware of any state where a 1,200-hour license does not transfer. If the state does have an advanced or master esthetician license, it earns that. If the state does not, then it equates to the lower level license, whatever that is.
And so the other thing that I know that happens, and this is more or less at the master's level or above, that Veterans Administration and Department of Defense also uses estheticians to help combat veterans when they have had facial wounds, other physical wounds, that, and it's a first step, but it's not the only step. So, and maybe this is a question maybe better asked of Senator Lang. Has there have you considered what, if passing this legislation, to make sure that the training, the proper training is there any way that we might be able to work with the Veterans Administration in terms of helping to provide? There are a number of areas that are seeking trained estheticians to work with military personnel as well as people who are in chemo. There was an opportunity for a World War II veteran, I think it was, who had some facial scars from World War II and advanced in age, but really was trying to see if there was anything that could be done to help, not cosmetically, although that would have helped, but whether or not that would have helped the face that had been disfigured by some of the events that happened to him in combat. And so they did that. Have we looked at how this might, because I think one of the things that happens when you begin to regulate an industry is that it provides more opportunities for collaboration with places that already are known for having the reputation of providing quality service. If we do this, is there an opportunity for us to then collaborate with veterans hospitals, veterans clinics? One of the things that happen all too often now, because there are so many veterans who need services, who need healthcare services, mental health care services, is the Veterans Administration has something called the community network. And so if you can't get treated at the VA hospital, then there are people that they are working with outside of the hospital. So this is a long way to answer my question, but I'm really asking, what does this mean for opportunities to collaborate for the benefit of veterans and even veteran spouses? And I'm thinking specifically about people who come back from combat because their injuries are severe. We're and I don't want to say to minimize it, but many times we're aware of the loss of limb, and we are aware of loss of sight. But many of the things that we are not aware of is, what does that look like? What does some type of burn or chemical interaction or whatever in combat, what does that mean for veterans? And then trying to make sure that the person who has stood up for freedom for us, that we stand up and do all that we can to try to make them whole again for life.
Thank you, Senator Chair Spearman, and I appreciate your comments. I think that the industry would do everything they could to integrate and to support veterans that come back from combat and need the services provided by the industry.
Mr. Burton, further comment? No?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. This is something where you can really ignite a lot of passion in me. This is my favorite thing to talk about. Students who graduate with this training are being hired by everything from chemotherapy practices, plastic surgery practices, in VA hospitals, dealing with trauma associated with all kinds of different events in life. And yes, plastic surgeons and dermatologists are on the front lines, and they are doing exceptional work. But there is a huge opportunity under and away from the scalpels to provide amazingly effective procedures that oftentimes take a series of treatments, even tattoo revision and tattoo removal. Those kinds of procedures are effectively being performed all over the US in states that recognize this license, or some states simply have laser technician training licenses, where these technicians, including our graduates, we know, are performing these meaningful procedures that mean everything to people who experience these kinds of traumatic events. And again, when properly trained and properly supervised, they're highly effective. And I would just love to point out too that we love the state of Nevada because the state of Nevada is a destination state. The state of Nevada has done an exceptional job with the conventions, and medical tourism is a huge industry. And this is an opportunity for the state of Nevada to also step up and create a licensing opportunity where I'm very confident other states will see this, and it will continue to be a tourism destination where outside students will look to the state to come here to receive meaningful training and a meaningful credential, a meaningful license that can transfer to other states. That is why we're really excited about the opportunity in this state to not just see it in Washington and Oregon and Utah and technician licenses in Arizona and Texas, master esthetician licenses in Washington, D.C., Virginia, Minnesota, Iowa, Mississippi. Nevada is a state, it's a destination state, and we're confident it will attract students from other states to come here for the training.
Thank you. So the training costs, I think you said 14, 15, maybe 16K. What type of financial aid opportunities are available for students who are not veterans and do not have access to the GI Bill?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. Matt Brenton, NEMA. Yes, so schools that decide to become accredited with an accreditation agency have access to Department of Education funding. So Pell Grants, GI Bill, any kind of federal loan like any university would receive. Students that attend an accredited school have access to those funds, like a student attending any university like UNLV would have access to.
Okay. So this is the last question. And broadcast, let's get ready to go to the phones. The thing that concerns me about something of this nature happening in Nevada, and it's unregulated, draws me back to several stories that we heard in 2020 about a particular airplane that had some design defaults and cost thousands of people their lives. And prior to the first plane going down, most of us had no idea of those design defaults. So the planes were flying, and then once the first plane went down, and then another plane went down, and so those families are still grieving because we did not have the type of regulation that we needed in place, government regulation that we needed in place to make sure that people's lives were saved. My concern in all of this is, if we are doing this already, what do we need to do to make sure that, and of course, you know, someone getting a scarring or something like that, maybe cosmetic is not as not as deep as someone losing their life. But if we're doing this already, if this is happening in Nevada already, I want to know that whatever the glitches are, and there have been some really good questions from the committee members, I'd like to know if there is any way whatsoever that we can work through whatever that is to make this bill better, not only for the safety of all Nevadans, but I have in my office, I have a piece of the Pentagon where the plane hit it. And one of my team members is one of the people standing at the top of the Pentagon where they unfurled the flag. And I look at that all the time, and that's what brings me back to everything that we look at. What does this do for veterans? What does this do for combat veterans? Because I cannot forget what they have already done for us. How do we work with this legislation to improve it so that this could be a stepping stone? And I'm mindful of the fact that one of my colleagues brought a bill a couple of sessions ago about dental therapy, and the whole dental industry came against it. And when I go to the VA hospital, they have dental therapists at the VA, but that's not something that's afforded to the civilian population here in Nevada because we don't have that intermediate step. So I'd like to know that. And broadcast, let's go to the phones now. We'll start off, first of all, with those who are in support, and we will have 15 minutes and 3 minutes per individual. Thank you so much.
Thank you, broadcast. Thank you, Chair. To testify in support of SB 291, please press star 9 now to take your place in the queue. Again, to testify in support of SB 291, please press star 9 now to take your place in the queue. For those of you that recently just joined us, we are currently in support of SB 291. Please press star 9 now to take your place in the queue. Chair, you have no callers in support at this time.
So let's go to the phones for opposition. 15 minutes, 3 minutes per individual. Thank you.
To testify in opposition of SB 291, please press star 9 now to take your place in the queue. Caller with the last 3 digits of 582, please slowly spell and state your name for the record. You have 3 minutes and may begin. Caller with the last 3 digits of 582, please press star 6 now to unmute yourself. Thank you. Please begin.
Good morning, Chair Spearman and members of the committee. My name is Jaron Hildebrand, and I am the Executive Director of the Nevada State Medical Association, comprised of nearly 2,000 physician members statewide. However, we consider ourselves first and foremost a patient advocacy organization. Here today in opposition of 291 based largely on public health and safety concerns. Firstly, we'd like to thank Senator Lang for her time in discussing this bill with myself and our concerned members. We know how hard she works, and we appreciate all of her efforts on this bill. I'll briefly share with the committee some of our concerns that we brought to the bill sponsor. This is not an access to care issue for these types of procedures. We believe this bill is bringing a solution where there is no problem. Again, there is not a shortage of providers who are adequately trained to provide these services. Their training they undergo is extensive, and we believe the authority given in this measure should require a higher standard of care and education, because if a procedure goes wrong, it can be devastating for the patient, plus the time and cost to repair can be devastating as well. These are not generally mandatory services that are recovered by insurance, so they're optional in the event if something does go wrong. The patient is almost entirely on the hook. That's why we believe it is up to the body of this legislature to ensure meaningful protections are put in place prior to a patient walking in for these services. We believe it is appropriate for the state to require standards and licensure for various professionals to maintain the safety of its citizens. However, this measure creates a new title of master esthetician as determined by a for-profit organization. We have concerns that only one company will be allowed to both create the requirements for a master esthetician based on the services it provides. This bill essentially will determine standards of a subspecialty designation within cosmetology. This bill appears to suggest that a registered nurse can be a supervising medical professional for a master esthetician if they are within 60 miles or 60 minutes of the location. We believe the health and safety of Nevadans should require a higher supervision standard. This does not improve patient safety, and I would argue it could threaten patient safety by teaching more evasive and dangerous techniques where the recipients of this certification will work on their own, nearly unsupervised. There is no comparable designation for other boards. Master injector status is given by manufacturers of fillers and toxins. These have PR and social media advantages for self-promotion. However, these should not be sanctioned by this state. Again, we thank the bill sponsor, and we look forward to working with Mr. Britton and willingness to work with us on this issue. Again, thank you, Madam Chair, and this concludes my remarks.
Thank you, caller. We are currently in opposition of SB 291. To testify in opposition, please press star 9 now to take your place in the queue. Chair, you have no callers in opposition at this time.
Thank you. And I just received a text that there were several students that were trying to call in support. There apparently is some type of a technical glitch, and they can't get through. So we will go to those in neutral, and broadcast, can you all work to see what we might be able to do so those people who were calling in support will be able to get through, or we can get their their comments on the record.
Yes, Chair, we will work on that.
Okay. All right, thank you. So no more in opposition. Let's go to neutral, 15 minutes, 3 minutes per. Thank you.
To testify neutral on SB 291, please press *9 now to take your place in the queue. Caller with the last three digits of 355, please slowly spell and state your name for the record. You have 3 minutes and may begin.
Yes, my name is Gary Landry, GaryLandry. I'm the Executive Director of the Nevada State Board of Cosmetology. I'm here to testify as neutral on this bill, and that's the way we're going to testify throughout this bill, as we're not for it, not against it. We're neutral, and we're looking for the legislators to give us direction as to which direction to go.
Thank you, caller. Again, currently, we are taking testimony neutral on Bill SB 291. To testify neutral, please press *9 now to take your place in the queue. Chair, you have no more callers neutral at this time. If you'd like, I can re-announce support to see if maybe anyone is having a hard time connecting.
Okay, please do that.
We are currently switching to support on Bill SB 291. To testify in support, please press *9 now to take your place in the queue. Again, to testify in support, please press *9 now. Chair, you currently have no callers in the queue for support.
Thank you. And I'm still getting a text that there's some people that are trying to get through. So let's give it a couple more minutes. And if you're trying to get through to testify in support, what I would ask you to do is to provide us written testimony, and we'll make sure that that becomes a part of the record. But let's give it a couple more minutes, because I did get another text indicating that they're still trying to get through.
Thank you, Chair. We will stand by, and we are currently working on it on our end.
Okay, thank you.
I'm sorry, Madam Chair, if I may. I know these students were lined up yesterday. We were planning to be heard yesterday, and they were able to get on. So maybe they're using login information from yesterday's meeting. I'm not sure, but I know that they're trying to get on. So thank you. And if they're unable to get on, we'll have written comments submitted.
Chair, we are currently working to talk with the committee manager. If you're willing to stand by for a few more minutes, I think we'll be able to get some online.
Okay, thank you, because I was just informed that some of them might have gotten some information, thinking that it was going to be on yesterday, and we had to move the bill forward because we ran out of time. So they have information from yesterday that may not be applicable for today. So that may be the problem.
Thank you, Chair. We are sending them the current number for today.
Okay, thank you so much.
Chair Spearman, this is Cesar Magreo. Looks like the students, we have a new contact number for the students. However, staff is not aware or have contact information for these students. So if we can take their testimony later during public comment, I can provide the contact information to Mr. Brinson, who could probably forward it to the students.
Okay. Okay, yeah, we can do that. And I will apologize up front to the students who were ready yesterday and we had to move forward. I try to make sure that I minimize that, but yesterday it could not be helped. So let's do that. We'll go on back to Senator Lang. You have any closing comments?
Thank you, Chair Spearman. I guess the overarching goal of this bill is to raise standards for customer care and to ensure the safety of Nevadans by establishing a licensing program to make sure that the people that provide advanced aesthetic procedures have received appropriate education and training. We appreciate the comments from Jared that came in, and we're happy to work with any party that's interested in making some changes to this bill. We're happy to have those conversations, and I hope that you'll reach out to me as well as members of the committee. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And one thing that I would ask, because it appears that the term master, quote, end quote, is causing some problems. I don't know if this is in statute, but we have several other professions where people are referred to as master. Can you take a look and see how that is defined and what attributes they need to have, what academic attributes they need to have in order to have that title? First thing that comes to mind is physical fitness trainer. So let's find out what that looks like, and let's try to address those concerns. Now, because we're going to come back to the testimony in support, I will suspend this hearing. I won't close it out, but I'll wait until we get those comments, and we'll come back and hear them, and then I'll close out this hearing. Okay?
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Okay, sure. And so with that said, we will now move to Senate Bill, just lost my place here, 261, Senate Bill 261. Please begin when you're ready.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. It's always great to be here with the Committee on Commerce and Labor. And good morning, Chair Spearman and committee members. My name is Nicole Cannizzaro. I currently serve as the senator representing Senate District 6 in the northwest portion of the Las Vegas Valley. And I am pleased to come before you this morning to introduce to you Senate Bill number 260. I'm sorry, we are on 260.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. That's my fault. I read it wrong. My fault.
That's okay. I just wanted to make sure I wasn't cutting in on someone else's time as I was saying that out loud. Thank you, Madam Chair. And Senate Bill 260, which proposes to expand statutory prohibitions on the sale of certain personally identifiable information of a consumer. By way of background information, commonly, and I'm sure many of us who have dealt with our constituents and have talked to them about some of the issues on their mind, currently express a lot of frustration over increased number of sales and robocalls offering different services or products related to searches that have been conducted on the internet. Likewise, it is interesting that, of course, just a mention of a product nearby your cell phone may result in targeted ads on social media. These situations happen because a person's personal information that we think is protected was most likely sold to several different data brokers. Data brokers are companies that collect a person's personal information and resell it to other companies for marketing purposes. These data brokers do not have a direct relationship with the consumers whose data they have collected, so most people are not even aware of what is happening. Unfortunately, consumer data is, of course, an extremely lucrative industry. According to TechCrunch, data brokering is a $200 billion industry, in fact. Over time, a single email address can be worth an average of $89. and more than double if a person is a frequent traveler. Because it is such a lucrative business, there are over 4,000 data and information broker companies worldwide. Most well-known data brokers do in fact offer an opt-out option for people to remove part or all of their data being published, while others may hide it deep in their privacy policy or not post an option at all. Of course, the most effective way to avoid information leaks for all of us would to go fully off the grid, get a burner phone, only use a PO box, and change your name to Jane Doe. But unfortunately, for most of us, that option is not entirely realistic. So that's why it's so important, I think, to make sure that we're doing everything we can to limit the reach of our data brokers and other companies when it comes to our personally identifiable information. During the 2019 legislative session, the legislature enacted Senate Bill 220 to prohibit an operator of a website or online service from selling certain personal identifiable information collected from a consumer if a consumer submits a verified request to the operator, directing the operator not to sell such information. I brought forth Senate Bill 220 last session after my constituents again had expressed some concern about the privacy of their personal identifiable information. Senate Bill 260 takes that next step in protecting our constituents' personal information by prohibiting a data broker from selling personal identifiable information if a consumer submits a verified request to the data broker, directing the broker not to sell such information. Madam Chair, we have been working with a number of individuals and a number of stakeholders in this bill to come up with some conceptual amendments, which I believe the committee has been provided with. I am joined today by Matt Robinson, who has been helping with the work on those conceptual amendments. I think we are still in the process of putting forth what I think will be good policy and that will work for a lot of these companies, while also protecting folks' information. What I would like to do is talk briefly about the sections that are in Senate Bill 260, and then turn it over to Mr. Robinson to discuss where we are in terms of the conceptual amendment and some of the ongoing conversations that we have had additionally with the Attorney General's office and other stakeholders, if the chair would permit.
Yes, ma'am. Madam Majority Leader, I'm informed we don't have those amendments. Is it possible to get them to us?
Yes, Madam Chair, I will ensure that the committee does get that conceptual amendment, and Mr. Robinson, I think, can speak to the pieces of that. As I mentioned, this is still, I think, very much a bit of a work in progress when it comes to the conceptual amendment. We have had some working group meetings to discuss some of the concerns of the stakeholders involved in this legislation. Much like we did with Senate Bill 220, I think what the overall goal here is to come up with a policy that allows for folks to protect that personal identifiable information, but that also will be workable from the company's aspect in terms of providing those options to the consumer.
Okay, thank you, ma'am. Proceed, Matt, proceed.
Oh, and Madam Chair, if you like, I can go through just what is currently in Senate Bill 260, and then I think Mr. Robinson can talk about some of the changes we're proposing.
Sure. Yes, ma'am.
Perfect. Thank you, Madam Chair. So the overview of the substantive sections of Senate Bill 260 starts with Section 2, which defines a data broker as a person engaged in the business of purchasing covered information about consumers who reside in this state from operators or other data brokers and making sales of or disseminating such covered information. Section 3 requires a data broker to establish a designated request address where a consumer may submit a verified request, which directs the data broker not to sell any covered information about the consumer that the data broker has purchased or will purchase. A data broker who receives such a request is prohibited from selling any covered information about that consumer that the data broker has purchased or will purchase. Furthermore, a data broker is required to respond to a verified request within 60 days of receipt. Section 3 allows a data broker to extend the period to respond to a consumer by 30 days if the broker determines that an extension is reasonably necessary, but the data broker is required to notify the consumer of that extension. Section 10 provides that an operator of a website who fails to make available to consumers a notice regarding collected covered information may remedy such a failure within 10 days after being informed, and only if it is their first time failing to comply with the requirements of this section. Section 11 makes it an unlawful act if the operator of a website continues not to provide the notice regarding collected covered information within 10 days, and if they knowingly or willingly fail to comply with the requirement of such notice. Section 12 authorizes the Attorney General to seek an injunction or a civil penalty against a data broker who violates these provisions. If the Attorney General has reason to believe that a data broker has violated or is violating the provisions of Section 3, the Attorney General may institute an appropriate legal proceeding against the data broker. Section 12 also provides that a district court that finds a data broker has violated Section 3 of this Act may issue a temporary or permanent injunction or impose a civil penalty not to exceed $5,000 for each violation. Obviously, in today's digital world, protecting our sensitive information and privacy often can feel like an impossible dream, but I believe that we can implement measures to allow our constituents the choice to opt out if they don't wish for their data to be sold, and to give them just a little bit more assurance in terms of where their personal identifiable information may end up. And with that, Madam Chair, what I would like to do is now turn it over to Mr. Robinson to talk just a bit about where we are in terms of a conceptual amendment and some of the concerns that have been raised.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, Senator. And Chair Spearman, members of the committee, my name is Matt Robinson, and I'm the Director of Public Affairs at Argentum Partners. And I'm here today on behalf of our client, Nevadans for Data Privacy. I'd like to thank the Majority Leader for agreeing to work with us on this very important bill, and we think it is a great next step to allow Nevadans the choice over how their data is used. And I'd also like to start by acknowledging the great work that was done on this last session, as well as the group that put in that work. It really did lay the foundation for what we're doing here today, and the people in Nevada will be better protected because of it. So I'll walk through some of the points on our conceptual amendment that was really kind of crafted after our discussions with our stakeholder group, as well as the Attorney General's office and others. As Senator Cannizzaro mentioned, currently, SB 260 defines a data broker as a person engaged in the business of purchasing covered information about consumers who reside in the state from operators or other data brokers and making sales of or disseminating such covered information. Through our discussions, it became fairly clear to us that this was overly broad and perhaps captured unintended parties. So the below is what we decided to do is include a provision where a data broker is a person or a business whose primary business is the collection and sale of covered information. You know, I don't think we look at most of the companies, especially in our stakeholder group, and think that is actually their line of business. So we were pretty confident that gives most folks cover and really does target the people that are buying wholesale data and sharing it for others to sell or target you with specific products. We also wanted to make sure that oftentimes companies will work together on promotions or special deals that require a transfer of data, whether among internal, other subsidiaries or partner entities that really are good for the consumer. So we wanted to make sure that could continue to happen. Also, in the definition of data broker in its current form, there is a reference to the dissemination of data. And again, we believe that's a bit broad and captured unintended operators. So we are in this conceptual amendment proposing that we remove that. And moving on, there is a right to cure period that is included in SB 260 and as well as SB 220 from last session. It essentially says if people make mistakes, companies make mistakes. And if they do, they should be afforded a period where they can rectify those mistakes. We were talking about potentially taking that, and in SB 260 in its current form, it diminishes that right to cure window from 30 days to 10 days. But as what we've also done in this bill is say that if you do make this mistake, you only get one chance per customer or per consumer. And then you'd be expected to operate in compliance moving forward as it relates to that consumer's data. So we didn't really see with that extra, with those extra teeth there, we didn't really see a need to diminish the time period. We figured it's better to allow a company to take the adequate time to implement the proper procedures so that they can actually make sure that it does not continue to happen. We also received some feedback from the Attorney General's office after the passage of SB 220 from last session. There's a provision in there that requires operators to establish and maintain a list of consumers that have opted to not have their information sold or shared. And in the days after passage, the Attorney General's office started receiving calls and notifications from several companies that said, you know, hey, we don't actually collect or store any consumer data. And this requirement or this provision is actually requiring that we do start to do so. So we would support an amendment that exempts folks like that. Also, after a conversation with the Attorney General's office in Section 11, I believe it's subsection 2 or 3 of SB 260, the legal benchmark is knowingly and willfully. They suggested that we remove willfully and proceed with just knowingly. And I'm not an attorney, but it seems to be a more appropriate legal benchmark for their office as they look to take action against entities that are in violation. Essentially, knowingly in this case means you either knew or you should have known. And we believe that coupled with that right to cure period, this is probably the best way to move forward for everyone. Additionally, Josh Hicks and McDonald Carano, he provided us 2 other amendments from fair credit reporting institutions and fraud prevention entities that they should be exempted. They are right now covered under federal requirements that govern these issues. And so we wanted to make that clear that those folks should be able to continue their business. And it's in fact in line with our consumer advocacy message here. So that's what I have, and I'd love to answer any questions you all might have to the best of my ability.
Thank you, sir. Majority Leader, do you have anyone else that's going to present?
No, Madam Chair. At this point in time, turn it over to you and members of the committee to answer any questions you may have.
Okay, thank you. Committee members, questions? Senator Pickard.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Senator Canizaro, for bringing this bill. I'm all for privacy. I think this is good policy. Just have a couple of practical questions. And Mr. Robinson, you suggested that where the amendment is going to narrow this to those who broker this data as their primary business. So since many of the internet, in fact, all of the internet service providers collect data and sell it, Google, Amazon, everybody who uses the internet and uses some standard application is probably delivering information to them, but that's not their primary business. They can buy and sell, and this does not, the amendment would preclude them from being included in this. Is that correct?
Matt Robinson with our Argentum Partners, for the record. Senator Pickard, that is correct.
Okay. And so how many people are we, I would think that the Amazons and the Googles and the ISPs of the world, whether that be Comcast or Cox or whomever, they're probably buying and selling the vast majority of data. How many brokers are out there that this is going to affect? Or maybe better asked, how much of the data bought and sold today is going to be captured in this?
Again, Matt Robinson with our Argentum Partners, for the record. Senator Pickard, thank you for the question. That's actually an interesting question. Currently, a lot of the telecom companies have actually taken it upon themselves to implement some fairly significant data protection standards. Not all, but a good amount of them. Vermont and California actually have data broker registries. They're unique in that sense. And as we were looking through to kind of really see who these companies are, they're not really your usuals. They're not the folks you were just talking about. They're smaller marketing companies, they're lead generators, they're online background check companies. Folks like that are really the data brokers. Currently, again, just for example, in Vermont, there are 120 that have registered under that new law. They expect to get up to about 2,000 as people realize that they need to come into compliance. I don't have I guess I can't give you a good estimation of how much actual data or raw data would be captured by this. But again, I think the telecom companies you brought up are kind of self-regulating in this sense. And again, it is not their primary business. So I think there is adequate cover there for those entities.
Okay. And then my other question just has to do with who's handling the request from the consumer, and how does that consumer then verify that the request is being honored?
Robinson with our general partners for the record. So that would essentially be left up. The process would be left up to the company to establish their own mechanism for that. I believe the language is they have to provide an address. I think that's open to their interpretation, whether it's a physical address, whether it's an email address, etc. I would have to get back to you on how the consumer would be able to verify that they have in fact been put on the list.
All right, we're making a requirement that consumers may at any time submit a verified request, but if most consumers, as I think Senator Cannizzaro suggested, don't even know that these guys exist, how do they make a request if that isn't, and I'm not saying that we don't need to start there. I'm just, I'm wondering what's the process that a consumer, somebody like me who just uses it without really knowing what is behind it, how do we make that request? How do we put this bill into practice?
And thank you, Senator, for the question. Through you, Madam Chair, to Senator Pickard, Nicole Cannizzaro, Senate District 6. With Senate Bill 220 from the 2019 legislative session, because that was this very similar question that we had with respect to that law, that's where we came up with the verified request to a designated request address that would allow for the company, if they were primarily digital, to use email, to utilize a mailing address, but that they would be required to post that so that the consumer could go in and opt out. And this would, with the same kind of structure, operate the same way. The way the consumer would know on the back end that the company had received that request is that requirement for them to respond to the verified request. If they fail to respond, then that triggers the penalties here that can exist. But that it is intended that when you interact with a website or a company that has this particular type of business, that they have to provide that as part of the opt-out procedure that they put in place, and then must respond within a period.
All right, I appreciate that. And I do remember SB 220, and my recollection of that is that the ISP or the website has to provide the link. I just don't know how the brokers under this scenario would do that, since they aren't providing the service. They're not, they're not hosting a website. They're behind the scenes entirely. So anyway, it was just a practical question, just wondering how we're going to educate the consumer to get that done. Anyway, thank you. I appreciate this. I'm again a supporter of privacy, so this is probably good policy. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Pickard. Members, any additional questions? So I had one. It was on section 12, and I don't know if this was asked because I got distracted, but on the language, section 12, line 11, where the data broker could be indirectly in violation, what are the scenarios that create an indirect violation where a legal proceeding would then start, or an injunction?
And Madam Vice Chair, Senator Cannizzaro, Senate District 6, I believe that that language we can definitely clean up, because I see your concern there. We obviously want folks who are actually violating the law to be to fall within the language and the purview of the bill and the legislation. I think what we are trying to get at is that if you are selling data, you need to be part of this, even if you're not the first initiating point of where that data comes from, right? That when we're talking about data brokers, and I think this plays back into the definition where we're trying to clean up the primary business piece. So that language probably needs a little bit more finesse with respect to the indirectly, because we are trying to get at those folks whose primary business is this, is to sell data. And the bill as originally written obviously had a broader definition. So I think between the changes in that definition of what constitutes a data broker, and then some more finesse in that language, we are trying to get at people who just directly violate the law, and not somebody who unintentionally does so.
Okay, thank you for that. Members, any additional questions? Okay, seeing none, we will go ahead and open up the lines for support for SB 260.
Thank you, Vice Chair. To testify in support of SB 260, please press star 9 now to take your place in the queue. Again, to testify on SB 260, please press star 9 now to take your place in the queue. Chair, you have no callers in support at this time.
Okay, thank you for that. So nobody's trying to get in like before.
No, Vice Chair, we have callers in the queue, but none of them want to speak in support.
Okay. Okay, all right. So then we will go to opposition for SB 260.
To testify in opposition of SB 260, please press star 9 now to take your place in the queue. Again, to testify in opposition of SB 260, please press star 9 now to take your place in the queue. Those of you that recently just joined us, we are currently in opposition of SB 260. To testify in opposition, please press star 9 now to take your place in the queue. Vice Chair, you have no callers in opposition at this time.
Okay, so we will go to neutral for SB 260.
To testify neutral on SB 260, please press star 9 now to take your place in the queue. Caller with the last 3 digits of 124, please slowly spell and state your name for the record. You have 3 minutes and may begin.
Good morning, Madam Vice Chair and members of the committee. For the record, Paul Moratkin, M-O-R-A-D-K-H-A-N with the Vegas Chamber. I'd like to thank the Senate Majority Leader for bringing the stakeholders together so we could discuss the intent of the bill and the policy issue at hand. Based on the feedback that we will receive from our members that would be affected by the bill, the Vegas Chamber would be neutral on SB 260 based on the proposed conceptual amendment. There were some original concerns in the original drafting regarding the broad definition of data broker and changing the response time, but we believe those concerns will be addressed in the amendment, and we thank the Majority Leader for those conversations and facilitating the dialogue. We will further review the draft amendment when it becomes available and with our members and follow up with any additional feedback. Thank you, Madam Chair, Vice Chair, and members of the committee for your time this morning.
Thank you, caller. Caller with the last 3 digits of 079, please slowly spell and state your name for the record. You have 3 minutes and may begin.
Good morning, Madam Chair, members of the committee. This is Josh Hicks with McDonald Carano, representing the Consumer Data Industry Association, or CDIA as we call it. CDIA is a national association representing consumer reporting agencies, including nationwide and regional credit bureaus and background and residential screening companies that promotes the responsible use of consumer data throughout the country. I would like to thank Senator Cannizzaro and Mr. Robinson as well for convening stakeholder groups early and having discussions on these bills. We have presented some requested amendments that Mr. Robinson mentioned earlier with respect to providing an exemption for entities which are covered by the Fair Credit Reporting Act, as well as creating an exemption for any kind of fraud prevention activities, so we don't have bad actors using these kind of bills to hide from the appropriate authorities. We thank the senator for being willing to take a look at these amendments. We very much look forward to seeing an amended version of this bill and look forward to further hearings on it. Thank you.
Thank you, caller. Caller with the last three digits of 781. Please slowly spell and state your name for the record. You have 3 minutes and may begin.
Hello, my name is Phil Recht, R-E-C-H-T. I'm an attorney with Mayor Brown who represent the People Search Service Coalition. And again, let me thank the chair, members of the committee for this opportunity to speak. Our coalition includes a number of well-known companies that provide background check, fraud detection, and people search services. These companies would qualify as data brokers under this bill. We support strong privacy bills. In our view, they are good for consumers and industry alike. As an example, we supported the California Privacy Bill as well as the creation of the California Data Broker Registry that was mentioned just a few moments ago. In fact, we were the one organization that strongly supported the creation of that registry. As well, our companies have been providing opt-out rights for many, many years, well before any state law required them, and we continue to do so today. So we are not hostile at all to the goal of this bill. But we are concerned that as currently drafted, the bill covers publicly available information. And under the First Amendment, states can regulate data that's already in the public domain only if they have a compelling reason to do so. But given that the data is already freely available to the public, it's hard to conceive of an interest the state would have in trying to restrict that data. In fact, many states and organizations have tried and come up dry, and as a result, both of the comprehensive state privacy laws enacted to date, and by that I mean the laws in California and Virginia, broadly exempt all categories of public data from regulation under their laws. So does the privacy proposal that's working its way through the Washington legislature. So does a model state law that's being developed by the Uniform Law Commission, and as you probably well know, that is a group made up of retired judges and law professors and the like. They've taken a hard look at this issue as well. All these groups, these legislatures, this organization, others have all carefully looked at this issue, have all concluded there's just no legal justification for regulating data that's already publicly available. Given all this, we would urge that this bill similarly exempt publicly available data lest it risk a First Amendment violation. The easiest way to do so is by amending the definition of covered information in Section 6 of the bill to exclude data that's made available to the public, be it in government records, by widely available media, or by consumers themselves. That's the kind of language that you see in these other state laws. We would be glad to provide suggested language, answer any questions the committee may have. I thank you very much for this opportunity to speak to you and for your consideration of these comments. Thanks.
Thank you, caller. Caller with the last three digits of 865. Please slowly spell and state your name for the record. You have 3 minutes and may begin.
Good morning. My name is Maya McKenzie, M-C-K-E-N-Z-I-E. Chair Spearman and members of the committee, thank you for allowing us to speak today. My name is Maya McKenzie, and I'm representing the State Privacy and Security Coalition. This is a group of 29 leading communications, technology, retail, automobile, and media companies, as well as 8 trade associations. We testify neither in support nor in opposition of this bill, and we very much appreciate the sponsor's work on SB 220 in 2019. But we are focused on refinements to this law, but because of the complex and intensely operational nature of privacy legislation, the text of this is critically important. The only way that we can make an accurate assessment of the bill's impact on businesses in Nevada, as well as consumers, is through careful review of the text. I mean, simply stated, every word matters. So we respectfully request that this committee not approve the bill until actual amendment language is vetted. Once exact language is provided, the committee can then determine whether this bill fits the existing regulatory landscape or increases disparities among states, which raises significant operational costs and problems. This patchwork regulation adversely impacts businesses and consumers in Nevada and often results in significant compliance costs by mandating the creation of complex and different compliance solutions. It's also important to understand that 2 other states have new privacy laws that won't take effect until 2023, and we have yet to see what the real world impact of those laws will be. Based on the proposed concepts circulated by the sponsor, there are several additions that would create a more workable pro-consumer bill. One example found in all similar multi-rights privacy laws is including exceptions for data and entities regulated by federal law, including the Grand Valley Act, the Driver's Privacy Protection Act, and as noted earlier, the Fair Credit Reporting Act. Provision of this information by information services is very important to fight fraud and identity theft, track down absentee parents who refuse to pay child support, and other important pro-consumer uses. So if bad actors can opt out of these information services, Nevadans and Nevada small businesses will be harmed. In certain cases, exemption ensures businesses can continue to use their current compliance solutions, which save on compliance costs, while also promoting existing consumer protections. So we thank you for your attention and urge you to proceed in a way that avoids unintended consequences. But above all, we look forward to working with Leader Canizaro on the substance of this bill. Thank you.
Thank you, caller. Caller with the last 3 digits of 358. Please slowly spell and state your name for the record. You have 3 minutes and may begin. Caller with the last 3 digits of 358. Please press *6 now to unmute yourself. Thank you, caller.
Good morning,
Please
Madam
proceed.
Chair. Good morning, Madam Chair and members of the committee. For the record, my name is Omar Salcedo, and I'm testifying here today on behalf of AT&T. First, I want to thank Majority Leader Canizaro for working with us and on this bill and including a large group of stakeholders in those meetings. Last session, AT&T was part of the large coalition of businesses that helped pass Nevada's privacy law, SB 220. We appreciated the Majority Leader's collaborative approach last session, as well as our concerted effort this session to help pass meaningful common sense privacy reform. We also appreciate the conceptual amendment that was presented here today, and as a result, we are testifying neutral. However, due to the complex nature of privacy legislation, the text of the legislation is critically important. We look forward to seeing a mock-up amendment to the bill soon and look forward to analyzing it when appropriate. Until then, we are neutral on the bill and look forward to working collaboratively with the bill sponsor and other stakeholders as this measure makes its way through the legislative process. Thank you for your time today.
Thank you, caller. And for those of you that recently just joined us, we are currently in neutral on SB 260. To testify neutral, please press *9 now to take your place in the queue. Chair, we have no more callers neutral at this time.
Thank you. I don't see any additional questions. Madam Majority, I have just one, and I was offline for a minute, so you may have covered it. This appears to be a problem that's very pervasive in the civilian population, and my question is, do we know what that looks like for persons who are in the military or veterans?
Thank you, Madam Chair, for the question, Senator Canizaro, Senate District 6. And I think an important one, especially as we seek to ensure that our veterans are protected under the laws that we're passing as well. I think they equally would fall under these provisions if their data was to be subject to sale by what we're defining as a data broker, or frankly, under the law in Senate Bill 220 from the 2019 session, they would still be permitted to opt out from that data. Obviously, there's some data that is that I think wouldn't be covered by this, because we are dealing with where your data becomes available through some of the same channels that we're all using online. But definitely that veterans fall well within the protections of this bill, as well as the current statute.
Yeah, and I appreciate that. And I don't know if it's possible to find out how many have already been harmed because this is not in place. And I understand that there are federal statutes that protect your credit reports, et cetera. But is there any way that we can find out how many of our military members or veterans? I think we have something like 300,000 veterans in Nevada. And so I'm concerned as to how not having this either has already affected them or what exposure they would have if it's not in statute.
Yes, and thank you, Madam Chair, for the question. Senate District 6. We will work on trying to see if we can find that information for you, Senator, and get some more definitive numbers.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that. Additional questions, committee members? I don't see any. So, Madam Majority Leader, you have any closing comments?
I just again want to thank the committee for having me here and being able to present Senate Bill 260, which I think is going to build upon some good work that we're doing in the privacy space. That is a very real concern for many of our constituents and also I think something that we're putting into place, a policy that is really workable and is going to protect consumers. So thank you again for having me.
Yeah. Thank you. And as always, I always like to make sure we're doing what we need to do for our military and veterans. So thank you for taking on that task. I appreciate it. And so with that, we will close the hearing on Senate Bill 260. And I want to bounce back to Senate Bill 291, where we put it on pause. And let's go back and open it up. I understand that we have some of the students who are online and they're ready to testify. Broadcast, are we ready for that?
Yes, Chair, I can definitely make that announcement for you again.
Okay, thank you. So we are back with Senate Bill 291, and we'll open up this part that we weren't able to get the last time to those in support.
Thank you, everyone who's just recently joined us. If you would like to testify in support on SB 291, please press *9 now to take your place in the queue. Again, to testify in support of SB 291, please press *9 now to take your place in the queue. Caller with the last three digits of 079, please slowly spell and state your name for the record. You have 3 minutes and may begin. Caller with the last three digits of 079, please press *6 to unmute yourself. Thank you. Please begin. Caller with the last three digits of 079, we can see that you are muted. Is it possible for you to begin speaking, please? Oh, there we go. Thank you.
Hi, I think having a master license is very important to reflect the training I'm currently receiving. Having a master's license is more advanced in your field, more job opportunities, helping with personal development, and being more competitive in the field.
Caller,
Thank
could
you.
you please, Caller, can you please state and spell your name for the record?
Yeah, my name is Tiffany Cagle.
And can you spell that first, please?
Tissaypagle.
Great, thank you so much. If we have any other callers on the line that are in support of SB 291, please press star 9 now to take your place in the queue. Caller with the last 3 digits of 572, please slowly spell and state your name for the record. You have 3 minutes and may begin.
My name is Paige Easley, Paigeeasley, and I am in. Thank you for letting me speak, Chairman and Council. I am in support of SB 291. I do believe that having a licensure to reflect the training that I have gone through would be very beneficial and helpful with finding job placement, and also help with regulation, having a master esthetician license, because the type of training that I've learned through NEMA is helps with regulation. We learn things that what we can and cannot do following protocols, rules, and guidelines. And I believe that through regular esthetician's licensing, that isn't spoken and touched on, and being able to have that master esthetician license recognized would just be overall beneficial for all of the patients and the clients and customers that are coming in for these advanced services. Thank you.
Thank you, caller. Again, if you've recently just joined us, we are currently in support of SB 291. To testify in support, please press star 9 now to take your place in the queue. Chair, you have no more callers in support at this time.
Thank you. And just in the event that someone was trying to get through and there was technical difficulties, please submit your written testimony. As a matter of fact, those of you who were able to get through, if you submit your written testimony, it would be greatly appreciated. Senator Lang, do you have any closing comments?
Yes, Madam Chair, just one comment, because I think I kind of closed before we had technical difficulties. I just want to clarify, I think the committee had some consternation about the word master esthetician, and we're looking into the word master for you, Madam Chair. But there are other states, we're not tied to that language. There are other states such as Oregon. They use the words advanced practice esthetician. So that could be an option if we were not inclined to use the word master. But we will research that and get it out to you so that you can get it out to the rest of the committee.
Okay. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am. And so with that, we will close the hearing on Senate Bill 291 and close the hearing on Senate Bill 260, if I didn't say that already. And we'll go now to Senate Bill 293. Revises provisions relating to employment. Madam Majority Leader, I think this is your bill as well.
It is. Thank you again for having me back, Madam Chair, and good morning to you and members of the committee. Again, for the record, my name is Nicole Canizaro. I represent Senate District 6, which encompasses a portion of the northwest part of the Las Vegas Valley. And I am very pleased to be here with you today to discuss what I believe to be a very important piece of legislation, Senate Bill 293, which seeks to stop the practice of requesting the salary history from a potential employee. Last session, of course, thanks in large part to the phenomenal work done by the chair of this committee, we took a monumental step in Nevada by passing equal pay for equal work. However, it is still critical that we recognize that the gender pay gap is still very much an issue that we have to take steps to address where we can. I have definitely shared, I think, some of my own story throughout the last few sessions that I have been here, I have a mother who worked in the hospitality industry my entire life growing up. And at the point in time when I had reached law school and was a little further along in my education, which was not quite that long ago, my mom finally got a job working as a manager in one of the restaurants that she was an employee at. Over time, there became a period where she then received one day some additional money in a paycheck. And when she went to inquire why it was that she had received additional funds, she was told that there had been yet another female employee who had made an allegation that there existed a gender pay gap and that there was not equal work or equal pay for equal work in her place of employment. And when that woman had challenged that, she sued and won. And in fact, there was pay discrimination going on. And as a result, because my mom fell into that category as well as someone who had been discriminated against because she was a woman and was being paid less, which is not I wish I could say that was a very unique experience, but definitely I think illustrates that this is a real problem that is ongoing here in Nevada and ongoing in our country. When she received that additional check, it was because she was being paid disparately based on her gender. And this is a problem that I think we can address. And I think that Senate Bill 293 allows us to take some of the steps to ensure that we are working to close that wage gap. I think the very first critical piece of that was passing equal work for equal pay. But this, I think, takes it a step further and is something that we know can work. I would say to folks who say that the gender pay gap no longer exists or that this is a problem of the past, that even my own story demonstrates that that is not the case. And this is a current issue. And this is a very real way under Senate Bill 293 to begin to address this problem. In fact, the wage gap costs women in the United States over $840 billion each year. And so it does have a significant impact on our working families. Current estimates mark that women on average make 82 cents to every dollar that a man earns. And today, in 2021, not in 1921 or 1821, but in 2021, a woman still has to work a year and 3 months to earn the same amount of money that a male employee earns in a year. And let me repeat that. In 2021, a woman still has to work a year and 3 months to earn the same amount of money as her male counterparts. And that is evidence of what we call a gender wage gap. We recently, even in this body, recognized that Equal Pay Day, which occurred about a week or so ago, was that day wherein a woman can finally say she had made as much as her male counterpart in the preceding year. A woman just starting her career as a result will earn $406,760 less over a 40-year work life on average compared to her male counterparts. For women of color, the inequity is even more pronounced. On average, a Black woman will earn $964,400 less over the course of her career than her male counterparts, while a Latina woman earns on average $1.1 million less than her male counterparts. This imbalance has been further exacerbated in the last year due to the COVID-19 pandemic. And so I do believe that Senate Bill 293 is a step not only in closing the gender wage gap overall, but also in addressing some of the very real consequences of where we find ourselves in this global pandemic. In the economic fallout from the pandemic, women have been the majority of our jobs that have been lost. Many have been forced to drop out of the labor force altogether and are sadly disproportionately represented in the industries that are most devastated by the pandemic, and particularly here in Nevada. While the passage of equal pay last session was, in fact, a monumental step in addressing the gender pay gap, there is still work to be done to help create parity in pay for men and women. Requesting job applicant salary histories has been a common practice for employers. Businesses often use salary information to calculate new hire compensation, a process that unfortunately also has a disproportionately negative impact on people of color and perpetuates a pay disparity between women and men. And it's not to fault the employer for using past salary history, but what we know now is that when employers request an applicant's salary history, it forces women and people of color to carry lower earnings and pay discrimination with them from job to job. So where there may have been relief in changing jobs and having that ability to seek an increased pay and to not be disproportionately affected by your new employer, when we rely on salary histories in order to make those determinations, we perpetuate the problem, even if it wasn't caused by that current hiring employer. Even if the employer is willing to pay an applicant significantly more than what he or she previously made, the negotiation process itself is likely to be affected by anchoring the applicant to his or her lower earnings. And that is one of the key pieces when it comes to wage disparity on the basis of gender. Even when factors like education, industry, race, region, and work experience are considered, the wage gap between men and women remains. And I think that's an important piece. These are not the types of things that are contributing to the wage gap. We aren't talking about the jobs that women typically work, the jobs that men typically work, and that's accounting for the wage disparity. Those are not the items that are contributing to this. But rather, because women are systemically paid less than men, employers who rely on salary history to select job applicants or to set a new hire's pay will tend to perpetuate those gender and race-based disparities in their workforce because of the negotiation process. Some employers may claim they need to know the salary history of applicants to determine the market value of an applicant or the position. But salary is not a neutral, objective factor, and we have to recognize that. In fact, it often reflects the historical market forces which value the equal work of one sex over the other. Simply put, relying on salary history leads to depressed wages for women and for people of color. To address these inequities, there are now 19 states and 21 localities that have enacted bans on asking for previous salary history. Some of those states include states like Washington, Oregon, Utah, Colorado, Missouri, Illinois, Wisconsin, Michigan, Ohio, Pennsylvania, Maine, Vermont, New Jersey, Kentucky, Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, Georgia, South Carolina, North Carolina, Maryland, Delaware, Massachusetts, Connecticut, and the list goes on. I believe that these same provisions should be implemented into Nevada law. This helps us to build on previous legislation, and some of you may in fact find Senate Bill 293 to be familiar. During the last few sessions, the legislature has considered similar provisions to address certain discriminatory practices related to employee compensation. In 2019, by way of example, the legislature enacted Senate Bills 166 and 177 to provide recourse for employees facing unlawful employment practices and discrimination in the workplace. Senate Bill 166 made several changes regarding filing a complaint with the Nevada Equal Rights Commission, or NERC, and expanded the remedies the commission may order when responding to unlawful employment practices. Senate Bill 177 helped expedite when a person may file a civil action in court as a result of certain unlawful employment practices by requiring NERC to issue a right to sue notice, which notifies the complainant that he or she may bring a civil action in district court against the person named in the complaint. I wanted to take a moment to highlight just a couple of things that have come up as a result of us looking at salary history bans that have been enacted throughout the United States. Of course, one of the biggest questions that I think is likely to come from Senate Bill 293 is whether or not this type of policy actually achieves the intended effect of helping to narrow the wage gap. Early research that has been done in some of these jurisdictions shows that yes, in fact, it does. This is in fact something that actually does work to have the intended consequence and effect. Overall, it will increase wages and earnings of women, but particularly for women where they are likely to have experienced an earnings penalty due to things like childbirth. It has had an impact in some of the initial reports for those who are women over the age of 35 who have children 5 or older, and that shows that they're actually experiencing a penalty as a result of being of childbirth age and having children, and that salary bans are actually helping to close that wage gap. In particular, a study of the Technology and Policy Research Institute at Boston University's School of Law shows that the effects of salary bans show the largest aspects affecting the wage gap comes from the salary bargaining process. And so what it does not show is that these disparities are as determined by things like education, experience, occupation, industry, region, hours worked, and those similar types of circumstances. Following the enactment of several salary history bans, that study looked into how that was shaping up in terms of evidence. And the evidence is showing that employers are now seeking to post wages more often, and that we see an increased pay overall for people who do change jobs, which is where this is really going to come into effect. That when somebody changes a job where they may have been discriminated against in prior employment and in prior pay, that where they do change jobs and we have an elimination of reporting salary history such that it would anchor down that particular applicant or may affect the amount of pay that they're earning, they're seeing a change particularly with women at 6.4% more and with non-white applicants at 7.7% more. So the early research here is showing that history bans do in fact have the intended effect. And I find that news to be exceedingly exciting because this is something that can still allow employers to hire individuals who are readily capable of doing the jobs, who have all the skills necessary, still allows them to pay what that company or what that particular business deems to be the appropriate salary range, yet it levels the playing field when it comes to the negotiation process. And that's one of the biggest factors that starts to play into the wage gap. I would like to take a couple of moments to walk through the overview of the substantive sections of the bill. And I begin with sections 1 and 9 through 12. Those sections prohibit certain private and public employers from the following: inquiring about an applicant's wage or salary history, relying on the wage or salary history to determine whether to offer employment or the rate of pay of the applicant, or refusing to hire, interview, promote, or employ an applicant, or discriminate or retaliate against an applicant if the applicant does not provide wage or salary history. However, an applicant is not prohibited under the language of the bill from voluntarily disclosing their wage or salary history, and an employer is not prohibited from using the voluntarily disclosed information to determine the rate of pay of the applicant. In addition, a potential employer is not prohibited from asking an applicant about his or her wage or salary expectation, and that is what they might want, what they believe they should be paid for the job, or what they would like to make at the job. I have had some conversations with some stakeholders and other interest groups who raised concerns about how we would ensure that it is in fact a voluntary disclosure and not inadvertently create a loophole to get around the provisions of Senate Bill 293. And I'm going to continue to work with those groups to ensure that that language is precise and doesn't create that unintended loophole or leave employers feeling as though they don't have clear guidance on what would constitute a voluntary disclosure. I think the piece of this is that if you are in the negotiation process and do want to talk about salary ranges, you should be permitted to do so. But what we're trying to do is ensure that employers are not asking that from the get-go, and thus it affects the entire negotiation and hiring process. Section 1 makes it an unlawful employment practice if certain private and public employers violate any of these provisions. An employer, employment agency, or any agent or representative thereof that is found to have violated the provisions of this bill may be subject to an administrative penalty of not more than $5,000 for each violation. Additionally, the Labor Commissioner may recover any costs and attorney's fees incurred in investigating such violations. Sections 3 and 5 provide that the prohibitions implemented by this bill do not apply to employment outside of this state, religious organizations, nonprofit organizations, and to certain businesses or enterprises on or near an Indian reservation. Section 6 authorizes a person who believes he or she has been injured by an unlawful employment practice relating to an employer's inquiry of wage or salary history to file a complaint with NERC. And Section 7 provides that if NERC does conclude that it is an unfair employment practice has occurred, the Commission must issue a letter stating the rights of the person who filed the complaint and of his or her right to sue relating to the alleged unfair employment practice. We have also had some outreach on this bill to ensure that when a complaint is filed, that complaint is timely addressed. And if a right to sue letter is issued within a timely period. Again, Madam Chair, I am working with the stakeholders and interest groups on that issue to ensure that we do have the proper mechanisms where a complaint is filed, and so they can have that timely notice to sue. Finally, Section 8 authorizes a court to award the person the same legal or equitable relief that may be awarded to a person pursuant to Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 if the employee is protected under provisions of Title VII or certain provisions of existing state law. One additional item that came to our attention was the applicability of Senate Bill 293 and which employers would be affected by this bill. I want to make clear that it is my intention to include all employers under the provision of this bill, and we may have an amendment down the road that will also address that aspect of it to ensure that that intent is within the language of the bill. Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the committee, for your consideration and support of Senate Bill 293. Again, here in Nevada, women earn just 83% of what their male white counterparts do, and women of color, specifically Black and brown women, earn even less. Black women earn just 65% compared to white men, and Latinas earn only 54%. At the current rate, the gender pay gap nationally will not be closed until approximately 2044, and we just can't wait. It is critical that we continue to work towards combating that disparity here in Nevada, as we have seen throughout the nation. And so I urge your support of this bill. And at this point in time, Madam Chair, would be happy to answer any questions that you or members of the committee may have.
Thank you, Madam Majority Leader. I see Vice Chair Neal's hand. I'm disturbed because I don't see Senator Pickard's hand. So thanks for letting me rib you, Senator Pickard. Vice Chair Neal.
Thank you, Chair Spearman, and thank you, Majority Leader, for bringing this bill and for wanting to lift up women of color who are historically paid less. I'm wondering, so I'm going to start off with a general question before I get into specifics of the bill. From the local governments where you are going into their practices, what have they said to you about any kind of costs that they're going to incur, or have they brought back any kind of negative comments? I'm just want to understand, like, because local, and I'm asking this question not because I'm trying to, cast shadow on this, but because local government have a tendency sometimes to be the biggest barrier in wanting to change and adjust their practices, and they try to associate costs that may not be real.
And thank you, Madam Vice Chair, for the question. Through you, Madam Chair, to Madam Vice Chair Nicole Canizaro, Senate District 6. Madam Vice Chair, I have not heard from any of the local governments on this bill. The outreach that I have had to work with some of the business industry, we've had some very productive conversations. I did receive one email this morning from the Northern Contractors Association expressing some concerns about provisions of the bill, which I have not had an opportunity since I received that today to have a thorough conversation with them. But as it comes to local governments, counties, localities, I have not heard from them either concerns or costs. And so I'm hopeful that in doing this, we can actually put in place a procedure, and I don't believe that it should incur costs, to your point. This is something that, especially when we talk about governmental work, there are typically salary ranges and salary levels that are applicable to a particular position. And so what this bill would allow for them to do is obviously to still have those ranges and to still base what they might pay someone within that range on their particular experience or job history. But what they cannot do is say, well, how much did you make in your last position? And then base that pay lower because maybe that applicant, especially if they're a woman, or particularly a woman of color coming in, was making less at a prior employment. So I haven't heard specifically from them. I don't believe that this should incur additional costs, especially because they already have different salary ranges and different salary pay grades. And I think that should still apply under the provisions of this particular bill.
So thank you for that, Majority Leader, because I wanted to ask, because in Section 1, Sub C, line 12, it has that language about refusing to promote, right? So in that series, it says refuse to promote. So I was wondering if you know, and you just kind of said it, was in that scenario where you are seeking a promotion, you're currently in a position, you realize that you're being underpaid and you are seeking the promotion. Does this then trigger behavior to make the local governments or the county to then have to give you the same wage that the male was paid, even though you came in at a lower wage? Because that could be a current scenario that a woman is in right now, and she had no legal capacity to challenge. And then she could see the language in section 1 sub C to try to make the argument that in a promotion process, you have to equalize me.
Thank you, Madam Vice Chair, for the question. Through you, Madam Chair, to Madam Vice Chair Nicole Canizaro, Senate District 6. I absolutely agree.
Majority Leader, just go direct. Go direct.
Madam Vice Chair, I think that actually is a very real example of exactly why the gender pay gap still exists, in fact. What section 1, subsection C does provide for is that they can't refuse to promote an applicant if that applicant refuses to disclose what their salary wage history is. So where I think an employee seeking promotion who may receive who would ordinarily receive a lower wage than a male counterpart, that probably falls, I would venture to guess, under the equal pay provisions that we passed from last session that allow for us to start to target where we see pay disparity. And what this bill is seeking to do is say you can't refuse to promote someone because they don't want to discuss or provide, and you can't ask for their wage or salary history. And so what this is intending to do is, I think, is address one of the circumstances that you've brought forward, which is where you're seeking a promotion, but because you've been paid less in the last position that you held, that you might get a lower salary range in that promotion. And what we are trying to do here is to say, well, you can't consider that. You can't ask about it in writing. You can't ask about it in the interview in order to set whatever that new pay is. Instead, we're trying to focus it on what your experience is and what you're bringing to the table in terms of your education and history, et cetera.
So thank you for that. And because I super appreciate the conversation, because number one, it hits home, because one of the things that have been a focus, and I have it in another bill, is trying to deal with the glass ceiling that is in play when you are trying to get a promotion, but you don't understand why you can't seem to make it up the ladder. And the process in and of itself is not transparent, so you have no ammunition to argue because you can't see your score, or you can't see where you landed in the promotion. All you know as an African-American female is that you were denied, but you have no ability and no mechanism to fight because no statutory provision is out there for you to actually say, well, I can prove that I got a 95 and they selected someone who got an 86. And so when I saw this language, I thought about that, it was great, but, thinking about the doorway into other things, trying to leverage and give capacity to women of color to be able to fight against internal and subjective processes that are keeping them in a lower pay range that has been their lower pay range for hundreds of years.
And thank you, Madam Vice Chair. Nicole Canizaro from Senate District 6. And I think you have hit on exactly why it is that things like salary history bans are effective. They're effective because what the evidence is showing is that negotiation process, where either, to your point, you're not aware of some of the other reasons that play into a decision, or you're not able and haven't been able to effectively advocate for yourself and your position and your worth, which unfortunately we see more with women and with women of color. That's where the disparity is persisting, and especially where there's a history of it, and we're just building upon that at every new position or every new job, that you start to build upon that history of disparity. You don't ever start to achieve parity unless you can really delve into that negotiation process. And the study from Boston University found that that was one of the biggest reasons why these salary history bans are effective, is because it deals with that negotiation process. And the more we can level the playing field among genders and among racial differences, we can start to see that we can in fact have a workforce that is on par with one another and that are being paid because of their experience, their education, the region, the industry, and those types of factors, rather than on these immutable characteristics that exist.
Thank you for that. Now I'll ask a very specific question. I'm super passionate about this, and so I'll just ask on section 1. So section 1, if you go to line 36, where it says that the Labor Commission can impose against any employer or representative. So I wanted to know who the representative was and who is on the hook.
And thank you, Madam Vice Chair. And I will say that this does mirror language that we see with some of the other bills that I had mentioned, with 166 and 177 from last session, that where it's either an employer, so you would fall under the definition in Chapter 613 as an employer or employment agency, or where you may have someone who is doing the hiring for that particular business, or someone who is simply maybe the HR director. We want to make sure that if somebody is violating this, be it an employer as a whole or their particular individual who's doing the hiring, that we can have the remedies available to get after some of this improper behavior and where they do fall into what would be considered an unfair employment practice.
And thank you for that, because I had a bill similar to this like last session, not in terms of this bill, but in terms of the line of individuals who could be liable. And when the counties came back to me, they came back saying that, you know, if it targeted employees, that folks who are employees of a government agency cannot be civilly liable, right? So they couldn't have liability that was imposed on them, and that they were limited. So I was wondering if that spoke to that, because it became a tool that they used in my bill to, number one, threaten to kill it, and to argue that I was imposing a civil liability on an employee who may be in an action. And so that's why I wanted to bring it up, because I think even in the legislature, we have disparity when a legislator of color brings language to try to fight discrimination, and bills are seen differently because I'm a Black female that's bringing it versus the other. And I'm calling this out because I've been in the building for a really long time, and I see the differences on when I'm challenged on language that I have and what I'm trying to go after. And because I'm Black, they see it as threatening, where it's not seen the same when it comes from you. And I'm not saying that it's a bad thing that it's coming from you, because I appreciate having folks in solidarity in the fight. I really do, more than you know. But I just I'm calling it out because we talk about these disparities that are going on in the real world, but they're going on in this building. And they're going on when we're legislators and we're treated differently because we're Black women bringing policy to fight discrimination, and they cut us down at the knees. And I'm at a point where I am no longer getting ready to tolerate that behavior coming from local governments about policy that I want to move as an African-American woman, where I want to fight discrimination. And you have language that I see that's very similar. And I have been threatened, and I've been told that my bill will die, and they will actively go to the governor to try to kill it. And so since we're having this as the platform this session, I'm having a moment And I wanted to bring it up because it's a real thing. And I wanted to call it out. And I had no idea that I would do this today, but it just struck me today when I read this bill that what I endured in this building on what I feel is legislative parity to fight discrimination, and that I don't even have the capacity as an African-American woman to come after issues like this without being looked at as threatening. And I'm a pretty pragmatic person, and I don't go after anything unless I've seen a series of abuses that I am just like, I am getting ready to challenge the system on this. And so I will leave it at that. And I'm just bringing it up because this drug out like an emotional space for me, which is super rare for me.
Thank you, Madam Vice Chair. Nicole Canizaro, Senate District 6. First, I have to say that hearing that absolutely breaks my heart and infuriates me. And anyone in this building who thinks that because a particular legislator, based upon their color or gender or any other characteristic, is not equally situated to bring forth language to address discrimination and disparities, which is part of the job that we have been hired to do, thinks that a threat of killing a bill is going to stand in this building is 100% and absolutely wrong. And I would love to be of any help in that I can. The fact that that has been a conversation with you angers me. I can't even fathom that someone would have those kinds of conversations, because Senator, what I have known from you and what I am getting to learn kind of upfront and personal, having worked with you this legislative session, is that you are nothing but a compassionate and fierce fighter for what is right. And I think we all could use to do a little bit more in that space and to act with that sort of intention. We absolutely have to address discrimination. I think this language does that. And I think that if we're seeing this language in other places, then it should be there. And we shouldn't be seeing disparities in this building based upon who is bringing a particular piece of legislation. We're of course always happy to have open dialogue about what is good policy and what is not. But the idea that some similar language in a different bill was challenged and that it is being done so because you are seen as threatening. Let me first say that I don't find you threatening at all. In fact, I find you to be a very fierce champion and someone that I definitely look up to. And I appreciate you sharing that with us today, because that's what this bill is trying to get at, right? This is but one mechanism that we can start to decrease discrimination, but where it exists even in our institutions of government, especially here in this building, and to hear that those kinds of conversations have happened is just, it's intolerable and unacceptable. And so let me just say that from the get-go. And where we're trying to work on discrimination and fix some of the policies that have endured, we absolutely have to do that. And we need everyone, including local governments, including our communities, to be behind us in that. So I appreciate you sharing that with me. I hope that my message is received to everyone else, that that is not an appropriate way in which to manage any legislator in this building, and certainly not you, Senator. And I find you to be one of the very kinds of people that should be in this building and should be fighting for these things. And that should not be taken by anyone any other way. So I'm happy to help however I can in supporting you in your efforts, because I think you're hitting on exactly the right things with respect to the negotiation process and with respect to discriminatory practices. I think we have to call that out and implement policies that will impact that. And I appreciate your hard work, and I'm not going to tolerate alongside you anyone who threatens to simply kill something because of that.
Thank you. Thank you, Majority Leader, and thank you, Senator Neal. I would expect nothing less from you, because I think the example that most of us have when it comes to tough legislation, we get that from your dad. So I would expect nothing less from you. So Majority Leader, I don't see any other questions from committee members, so I'll try to.
Madam Chair.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
This is Senator Settlemyer.
Okay, go right ahead.
Thank you. I'll lower my hand back down.
I'm sorry, I didn't see your hand.
It's okay. A lot of things going on. In that respect, I appreciate the bill, and I'm going to have to defer to individuals. And traditionally, in my industry, my father always raised me that, you know, salary was always a very private thing. You don't talk to people about how much money you make and braggadocious. You also don't cry about how much money you make, and you just don't talk about it. And that was how I was raised. It didn't matter who it was. So I'm going to have to defer to the rest of the group that's had more similarities or more issues in this realm than I ever have. But in the respect of one of our fellow members of this body that had such an experience, I wish you would just tell us the county that was crazy enough to indicate that to her. I mean, I've had people threaten, you know, to kill my bills, big deal. It didn't matter if, even when I was in the majority, they would sit there and come forward. But I find that very troubling. And if for some reason it's any of the counties I represent, which I kind of doubt, most of my counties are rural, and we don't take that attitude for legislators. It's generally the larger counties that seem to think they can push us legislators around. But if they are any of my counties, please tell me so I can try to correct that injustice, because it was wrong. And so I guess that was more of a statement than a question. And I look forward to trying to work with everyone on this particular issue. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Senator Settlemyer. And let me just say to you, it's voices like yours that come from a place where you may not have the same experience that Senator Neal had. It's voices like yours that add a powerful emphasis to the injustices that have been done, because you recognize it and you too are willing to call it out as an ally. So thank you. Thank you so much. Did I miss anyone's hand question? Don't want to do that. So last year, I think it was maybe June, July, I heard Congressional Representative Stephen Horsford say something that has stuck with me, and that is people keep saying after the pandemic, we have to get back to normal. And his statement was, I hope we don't, because normal wasn't that good for many people, not just in this country, but in this world, many people who had been marginalized, by systems that simply ignored them and ignored their cries. So I think, if I might, Madam Majority Leader, I think what you're doing is probably building on that statement. Normal wasn't that good for women when it comes to the subject of pay. You mentioned that it takes to March for women to earn March of the next year for women to earn as much as their male counterparts in the previous year. And that is true, but it's only true for white women, because for Black women, it takes until August of the next year. And for Latinas, it takes till September of the next year. And so the pay disparity is really prevalent. And because because those numbers haven't changed, at least since I've been in this building, and even before, those numbers haven't changed, it says to me that there is a culture that has been calcified by normalizing it and by probably ignoring it, or by trying to demean it. Whatever the case, it's there, and it should not be there. As you stated, it's not 1821, it's not 1921. We're talking about 2021. And so what you're doing, I think, brings a spotlight to that. Frederick Douglass said on one occasion, "Power concedes nothing without a demand. It never did, and it never will." I want to read something to you, and I guess this is more of a statement than a question. But in a March 7th NPR interview, a couple of things that were said during that time says, what's worse, among the most impacted by long-term unemployment are women and people of color who were disproportionately hit by layoffs during the pandemic. Before, both groups were already getting paid less before the pandemic and now face the risk of a pandemic hit to their lifetime earnings. And this is the piece that I think struck me the most. A McKinsey study from February predicts it could take 2 years or longer for women and people of color to recover jobs lost during the pandemic. I think that is important. And so I guess my question would be this: there are various and sundry ways that that some people will try to get around this. Have we looked at some of the things, and I'll reference what Senator Neal just said. It's those, latent or covert activities that really hurt progress the most. This session is not like any, and it appears to me that because of the way that this session has had to operate, that there are more and more, not just progressive bills, but more and more pieces of legislation on both sides of the aisle that are challenging the way it has always been. Have we looked at all at some of those latent or covert activities that could come up that would circumvent what your bill seeks to do?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Let me begin by saying that I certainly included in my remarks the note that it is the equal pay day, or what we refer to as equal pay day in March, is on average where women are. Certainly not meant to ignore nor disparage women of color who are systemically in a worse place than white women, and was definitely not meant.
Oh yeah, and I didn't take it that way. What I wanted to do was punctuate the fact that you have 3 tiers of pay, in equal pay for women, and so I just wanted to punctuate what you said, because some people may just take it as, oh, okay, all right, but just wanted to punctuate. Yeah, so.
No, absolutely, and thank you, Nicole Canizaro, Senate District 6, and I appreciate that you brought that up because certainly what we are talking about are these very great pay disparities, not just between women and their male counterparts, but in particular, women of color. And so I think that Senate Bill 293 obviously goes a huge step in the right direction. And what we're seeing where these have been enacted is that it is having the intended effect of helping to level that playing field, which I think speaks to your notion that we should be doing things better, especially after a pandemic. And one of the things that I did mention, and why I think this bill is essential now, even in a legislative session where we are hampered somewhat by the way in which we can operate, and where we really are focused on the recovery of the state and the recovery of our economy, and how do we start to bring jobs back. One of the biggest ways that we can help to support working families and to support the communities we represent is ensuring that as jobs start to come back, that we are implementing measures that will ensure those families are not being disparately impacted, even more so, especially where we see that the numbers are that women are bearing most of the proportion of job loss here in the state of Nevada, especially. And so as we're looking at ways to build back, how do we build back stronger? How do we build back better? So we're not just doing the same old thing. And I would agree with that, absolutely. And I think this bill is a big step in that direction. One of the things that I am still working on and trying to sort of tighten up, if you will, is ensuring that there aren't unintended loopholes in this bill. Certainly, it's not as though we are trying to prohibit employers from having negotiations over salary. Because that always plays into when people are in the midst of a hiring or promotion process, conversations around salary can be appropriate. But what we should not be doing is allowing that to be the starting point. And so that's why you see the provisions in there about if someone voluntarily discloses that. Obviously, if an applicant comes in and there's no prompting from the employer to ask anything about salary history or what they have been making or what they've been paid in the past, and the applicant sits down in the course of that interview, says, well, and also one thing I wanted to mention, at my last job, I was making, I'd like to make, this much more at this job. I'm hoping you can accommodate me. We're not trying to create a situation where if that was divulged voluntarily by the prospective employee, that the employer is now in a situation where they would be facing penalties and potentially have committed an unfair employment practice. Similarly, what we don't want to have done, and I think this is maybe even the bigger threat, frankly, is where employers who are less scrupulous and who are trying to find a way around this, or who want to perpetuate pay disparity, or believe that because, for example, the applicant sitting in front of them is a woman of color, so she probably would accept less, and they kind of go in knowing that, and want to use that wage history in order to perpetuate that and save themselves a couple of bucks, that we're not creating a system where they could ask a differently worded question or sort of tease that answer out of the applicant. So I do think that we need just a little bit more work. And I've talked with some stakeholders and some interest groups who want to make sure that that language is particularly tight, so that we don't have those unintended ways to sort of nefariously get around what we're trying to do here. So we can hold those more of the bad actor employers accountable, but where we also are solving the issue with respect to salary history bands and how they interact with employment history and prospective employment, and start to impact that wage gap. So I think there's a little bit more language cleanup to be done to ensure that that doesn't happen, but that is very much on my radar and on others. And we do want to create a policy that is going to achieve that without having these mechanisms by which you can continue to perpetuate disparity.
Thank you, ma'am. To Senator Neal's point about increased costs to anyone, whether it's county or private industry, I guess I'm having a difficult time trying to figure out how tethered to reality that statement would be if you're simply hiring a person and this is the salary that a person with this skill set can do. So last thing that I'll say, and then I'd like to go to the calls. In 2017, I believe it was, we had a presentation by I think it was GHHS, where they looked at how students were doing in school and how they were how the emotional quotient was or was not increasing. And I was struck by the fact that they said most of the students who lived in single households did not do as well as students who were in a household where there were two parents. Struck by that because, number one, there was no acknowledgement that sometimes there are two parents that are same gender. But the other piece of that was, why does that happen? When we look at pay inequity, we're actually talking about, it's not a woman's issue. It really is an economic security issue for families. So I asked the question, why is that? What did you find in your research that connected the single parent households? Was there anything that looked like, okay, this is probably one of the reasons, or this is probably one of the correlations? And the answer that I got, and I would invite anyone who doubts what I'm saying to go back and look at it, but the answer that I got was most of the single parent households were headed by women who had more than one job. And so the time that they could spend with the students, with their children, was significantly less than those who had a two-parent household, even where there was one parent who had more than one job. And I know that, sometimes people say, well, you all are playing the gender card. And to that, my response is we're playing the hand we were dealt. And if gender card is in the stack, that's what we're doing. So broadcast, please open up the phone lines. We'll start with support and 15 minutes 3 minutes per individual. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. To testify in support of SB 293, please press *9 now to take your place in the queue. Caller with the last 3 digits of 150, please slowly spell and state your name for the record. You have 3 minutes and may begin. Caller with the last 3 digits of 150, please press *6 now to unmute yourself. Thank you. Please begin.
Thank you, Chair. My name is Andrea Johnson, Andrea Johnson, and I am Director of State Policy at the National Women's Law Center, and I am here in support of SB 293. We are really excited to see Nevada finally joining the movement to ban the harmful practice of relying on salary history. This is a really proactive measure that will help insulate Nevada businesses against wage gaps arising in their workforce to begin with, and thus decrease business exposure to equal pay lawsuits. And that's why we're seeing more and more employers disavow this practice, including state and local governments moving away from this practice. 14 states have now passed salary history bans like this, all with bipartisan support. And as the senator said, research is already showing that they are helping close racial and gender wage gaps in those states. And as businesses seek to rebuild from COVID, and the millions of women, particularly Black women and Latinas, who have been forced out of the workforce due to the crisis, seek to re-enter the workforce, it is so important that we prohibit reliance on salary history. This will not only help avoid Nevada's wage gaps from worsening, but will help businesses more effectively and equitably rebuild and help job seekers re-entering the workforce secure pay that accurately values their worth. We want to thank quickly the senator for working with us and other stakeholders to address concerns, notably ensuring that this bill applies to all sizes of employers, not just those with 15 or more employees, as every state that has passed a salary history ban thus far has made sure it covers all employers. And this is an easy to comply with provision regardless of employer size. Just don't ask for salary history. So it should really cover all employers. We also want to thank the senator for working to make sure the exception allowing employers to rely on salary history if voluntarily provided, that is an exception we support. We just want to make sure it doesn't become a loophole undercutting the goal of the law, and encourage this bill to include language like we've seen in some other states, saying that an employer can rely on salary history to support setting a higher salary than they initially offered. And also that it's important that that reliance doesn't create a gender-based wage gap, which would be unlawful under Nevada's equal pay law. So including some of those clarifications we think would really be helpful. But thank you very much for your leadership on this, and I'm happy to answer questions.
Thank you, caller. Caller with the last 3 digits of 362, please slowly spell and state your name for the record. You have 3 minutes and may begin.
Good morning, Chair Spearman and members of the committee. For the record, my name is Katie Robbins, Katie Robbins. I represent Planned Parenthood Votes Nevada, and we are here in support of SB 293. Discriminatory practices such as requiring wage history can negatively impact many applicants and lead to strong, diverse candidates being unnecessarily and unfairly overlooked for positions, as well as continue the inequities of pay we see between the wages of men and women and people of color. We urge your support of SB 293. Thank you.
Thank you, caller. Caller with the last 3 digits of 777. Please slowly spell and state your name for the record. You have 3 minutes and may begin.
Yes, my name is Christian Gabroy, Gabroy. Thank you, Madam Chairman of the committee and Senator Canizaro. I am here speaking on behalf in support of this bill with the Nevada Justice Association, the Legislative Committee. As a background to myself, I am one of the few employee rights attorneys as an employment lawyer here in the state of Nevada. Since 2004, I've been assisting workers in establishing rights, fighting for fair pay, fighting against discrimination, fighting against harassment, and fighting against wrongful termination. This brilliant bill by Senator Cannizzaro helps to eradicate such discrimination, helps to stop such harassment, and is an effective measure in dealing with the discrimination that individuals face today based on their status and their protected status as female or as minorities. A little bit of history, I think, is probably appropriate here. In the past, the outright discrimination was much more in your face, was much more objective, and could be clearly seen. In light of Ruth Bader Ginsburg's recent passing, if we look at her history, she graduated top of her class from Harvard, and the only position that was available for her for years was a receptionist. The same thing for Sandra Day O'Connor, who graduated top of her class from Stanford. She could only find a position as either an assistant or a receptionist. Let's fast forward 50 years now. And in every day in my practice in dealing with this, unfortunately, I see this discrimination. As Senator Cannizzaro correctly pointed out, that women only make 82% of what their male counterparts earn. And the statistics, as Senator Cannizzaro pointed out, are much, much worse for minorities. I'm even showing a lower statistic than the 64% of what Ms. Cannizzaro pointed out. According to the Department of Labor, I'm showing that minorities only earn between 59 and 62% of their male counterparts. So let's talk about why this bill is important. Because I would imagine that the opposition would say, what's the big deal? You're discussing your wages. You can ask what the wage history is. You could discuss what your anticipated wages would like to be in the position and what you expect your wages to be. That's not the way that happens. In the real working world, in the trenches, what I see as an employee rights attorney, and one of the few ones actually. So I thank you, and I'll close on that then.
Thank you, caller.
Yeah, caller, you can submit the rest of your remarks in writing. Be happy to have them. Thank you.
Thank you, caller, with the last three digits of 387. Please slowly spell and state your name for the record. You have 3 minutes and may begin.
And just before they do, I just want to reiterate, we're giving 3 minutes to each person who's calling. And if someone has already said what you wanted to say, it's okay to come in and say ditto, and whatever testimony you have that you wanted to get on the record, please submit it in writing, okay? So thanks a lot. We're just trying to make sure we get as many people in as we possibly can. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll be brief. For the record, my name is Virginia Valentine, Virginia Valentine. Good morning, Chair Spearman and committee members. I'm pleased to be here today on behalf of the Nevada Resort Association to speak in support of SB 293. As you know, the association represents some of the largest employers in the state. We agree with the sponsor that the provision of this bill will help level the playing field for job applicants and ensure equity in hiring. Senator Neal, I want to thank you for your comments and your passions. I know it's not easy to speak out, but it's your legacy and you have such a powerful voice. Again, we'll just thank the chair and committee in closing for your time this morning, and especially Leader Cannizzaro for bringing the bill. Thank you.
Thank you, caller. Caller with the last three digits of 805. Please slowly spell and state your name for the record. You have 3 minutes and may begin. Caller with the last three digits of 805, please press *6 now to unmute yourself. Thank you. Please begin.
Good morning, Madam Chair, members of the committee. My name is Jessica Stender, JESSICA-STENDER, and I'm Senior Counsel for Workplace Justice and Public Policy at Equal Rights Advocates. We are very excited to support this bill today and thank the Senator for her leadership on this. As you've heard, women overall earn just 82 cents to every dollar earned by men. However, as we've been discussing, women of color face a significantly larger wage gap. This gap isn't only harmful to women, but also to their families, as women are often the primary or co-breadwinners in their household. So these disparities are harmful to all, including the overall economy. We are very pleased to see that Nevada will likely join the growing number of states that have been already passing these laws to ban inquiry into and reliance on salary history, as it's a major contributor to the gender and race-based wage gaps. An employer's inquiry into a prospective employee's past pay might seem innocuous on its face, but because we know that women, especially women of color, earn less than their male counterparts in virtually every industry and occupation in this country, such inquiry and reliance on prior salary results in perpetuating gender and race-based pay gaps. I would just want to note that a growing number of companies have already recognized the harm of perpetuating past pay discrimination by voluntarily choosing to stop asking about prior salary, even when they're not required to do so. The Society for Human Resources Management, a trusted resource for HR professionals, has declared that salary history should not be a factor in setting compensation. And I'd like to just align my comments with some of the other supporters who have already called in to support the various potential amendments that the Senator laid out. I want to just end by saying we thank Senator and Majority Leader Canisaro for leading this important effort, and thank the committee for your consideration of this legislation. I'm happy to answer any questions you might have. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Caroline Mello Robertson, Caroline Mello Roberson. I am the Southwest Regional Director for NARAL, Pro-Choice America, here to ditto and speak in support. Thank you, Senator, for bringing this important thing forward.
Thank you, caller. Caller with the last three digits of 199, please slowly spell and state your name for the record. You have 3 minutes and may begin.
Good morning, Chair and members of the committee. For the record, my name is Tess Opferman. That's O-P-F-E-R-M-A-N, speaking on behalf of the Nevada Women's Lobby. I want to express my personal appreciation to Senator Canisaro for bringing forward such a reasonable and necessary bill. As a woman working to move forward in my career, I don't want my salary history to determine my future salary. It is unfair and continues to contribute to pay inequality for women and people of color. My experience, my qualifications, my references, and interview are all appropriate ways to determine whether I am capable of performing a job and the pay I should receive. Asking what salary I expect or need is another appropriate way to decide my pay rate. Asking about prior salary history is not. Asking about my salary history is one of the many ways our employment system continues to contribute to pay inequality. On behalf of myself and on behalf of the Nevada Women's Lobby, I urge you to support SB 293 and pass policies that can help break systems that maintain inequality. Thank you for your time this morning.
Thank you. Broadcast, we have about 3 minutes left. So if we have some more people that want to just come to the mic and say ditto, we can get more people in, but we only have 3 minutes, okay? If you read your testimony, this will be the last caller, but if you can say ditto because it's already been covered, we've got time to get more in. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Chair. Caller with the last three digits of 237, please slowly spell and state your name for the record. You have 3 minutes and may begin.
Good morning. My name is Marlene Lockard, L-O-C-K-A-R-D, and calling on behalf of the Nevada Women's Lobby. We are very much in support of this bill. Much has been said, but I did want to add an absolutely startling figure. According to the International Women's Policy Research, if current trends continue, Hispanic women will wait 232 years for equal pay. Black women will wait 108 years. This is not acceptable, and over a lifetime, the economic impact for women with a bachelor's degree, they can lose up to $713,000 on average. So it is an economic issue, and it impacts all of us, not just women. It impacts our society. We strongly support this bill. Thank you.
Thank you, caller. Chair, you have no more callers left in support at this time.
Thank you. We'll move now to opposition, 15 minutes and 3 minutes per individual. And remember, if someone has already said what you wanted to say, ditto is okay. And that way we can get more comments on the record. Proceed, broadcast.
To testify in opposition of SB 293, please press star 9 now to take your place in the queue. Caller with the last 3 digits of 116, please slowly spell and state your name for the record. You have 3 minutes and may begin.
Thank you, Chair and members of the committee. My name is Alexis Motorex, Alexis Motarex, with the Nevada Chapter Associated General Contractors representing the commercial construction industry in Northern Nevada. We are here with some concerns about how SB 293 is drafted, but not opposed to the intent. AGC believes that it should not be unlawful for an employer to merely seek information regarding prior pay. We feel there are some circumstances where it is helpful to both the prospective employee and employer to have a clear understanding of wage history and expectations. The Equal Pay Act seeks to prohibit reliance on wage history to protect against discrimination. We would like to see the language drafted more similarly to that. Section 1, sub 1B is a little confusing to us. As written, Section 1, sub A would make it unlawful to seek wage history. Thus, if an employer sought the wage history and relied upon it, the employer has already violated the law by seeking the wage history. But then Section 1, sub 2 states that an employer is not prohibited from relying on wage history if the prospective employee discloses it voluntarily. These provisions seem to appear to conflict with one another. And lastly, we have additional concern with Section 1, sub 2. The language seems ambiguous as to the meaning of without prompting. This will likely be the source of argument and confusion. Employer says the applicant offered their wage history without prompting, and the applicant says the employer prompted. Quintessential she said in the course of a job interview or conversation that is likely not formally documented. It can happen in an instant, resulting in 2 completely different sides of the story. We welcome the opportunity to work with the sponsor and stakeholders to accomplish the intent, but address some of our concerns as this bill moves through the process. Thank you.
Thank you, caller. Caller with the last 3 digits of 116, please slowly spell and state your name for the record. You have 3 minutes and may begin. Caller with the last 3 digits of 116, please press star 6 now to unmute yourself. Moving to the next caller. Caller with the last 3 digits of 114, please slowly spell and state your name for the record. You have 3 minutes and may begin.
Greetings, Chair and members of the committee. For the record, Amber Stidham, AmberStidham for the Henderson Chamber. We do want to thank the sponsor for bringing this bill forward. As written, we do have a concern about the bill, not its overall intent, which as a result, I believe, places us technically in opposition. First, I do want to be clear that our chamber supports workplace access and equity. As a woman myself in the workforce for nearly 30 years, I too have experienced gender pay inequity compared to some of my male counterparts for the same or their more junior position. So these discussions do hit close to home. Well, we do support good employers to comply with federal anti-discrimination employment laws that are in place, especially those based on sex and race, 2 aspects outlined by the bill sponsor during our opening remarks. What we're concerned about is the bills and attorney's fees and investigative costs toward the outlined in the bill, and those employers mainly are smaller businesses who may have either made an unconscious or honest mistake, or those who have had a false claim brought against them and would need to undergo the costly remedy process outlined within the bill versus, say, pursuing a private right of civil action, a legal process we believe could be more palatable for all parties. That's our primary concern at the time. Thank you so much for the opportunity to share our comments.
Thank you, caller. Currently, we are in opposition of SB 293. To testify in opposition, please press star 9 now to take your place in the queue. Caller with the last three digits of 116, please slowly spell and state your name for the record. You have 3 minutes and may begin. Caller with the last three digits of 116. Oh, we have just lost that caller. Chair, you currently have no more callers in opposition at this time.
Okay, thank you. If that was an inadvertent hang-up for the caller who was there, you feel free to submit your testimony in writing, and we will include it in the record. And so now we will go to those testifying neutral, 15 minutes and 3 minutes per person. And if the person ahead of you, someone ahead of you has already stated what you want to say, ditto is a good response. If you want to say ditto and then add more information, that's good too. 15 minutes, 3 minutes per individual. Thank you. Proceed, broadcast.
Thank you, Chair. To testify neutral on SB 293, please press *9 now to take your place in the queue. Caller with the last three digits of 124, please slowly spell and state your name for the record. You have 3 minutes and may begin.
Good morning, chairs. Good morning, chair and members of the committee. For the record, Paul Moratkin, M-O-R-A-D-K-H-A-N with the Vegas Chamber. I would like to thank the Senate Majority Leader for discussing and meeting with the Chamber regarding SB 293. In regards to the bill, the Chamber is neutral as introduced. The Vegas Chamber is the state's largest and broadest business association and supports the principle that there should be an equal pay between employees for equal work, regardless of their gender, and we have no issue with the bill. We believe SB 293 looks to codify the Ninth Circuit Court ruling of Vizzo versus Viano in 2020 as it relates to wage history. That court case, to our understanding, directs that employers would not be able to ask about wage history from prospective employees as part of the application process. We view as SB 293 would align state law with that ruling and codify that ruling. We believe this bill is well balanced for both employees and employers. We believe this bill is focused and to the point with a clear intent it was trying to be achieved, and we appreciate the Senate Majority Leader for bringing this bill forward. Thank you, Chair and members of the committee.
Thank you, caller. If you recently just joined us, we are currently taking testimony on neutral. On SB 293, to testify neutral, please press *9 now to take your place in the queue. Caller with the last three digits of 387, please slowly spell and state your name for the record. You have 3 minutes and may begin.
For the record, Christopher Sewell, Chief Operating Officer and Legislative Liaison for Dieter. We want to thank the Majority Leader for bringing this bill forward, and Dieter and NERC stand ready to assist the Majority Leader with this bill whatever she needs from our agency. Thank you.
Thank you, caller. Caller with the last three digits of 781, please slowly spell and state your name for the record. You have 3 minutes and may begin.
Good morning, Chair and members of the committee. Nick Vanderpool, Nickvanderpoel, with Capital Partners, calling today on behalf of the Reno Sparks Chamber of Commerce, calling as neutral. We appreciate the Senate Majority Leader bringing this legislation forward and working with interested parties and save time for the committee. A lot of ditto of what my colleague from the Vegas Chamber said. Thank you.
Thank you, caller. Chair, you have no more callers neutral at this time.
Thank you so much. Are there any questions from committee members at this time? I don't see any hands. Madam Majority Leader, do you have any closing comments?
I just wanted to again thank the committee for having me here today to present what I do really feel is an important piece of legislation that goes a long way in helping to actually equalize where we are in terms of pay discrimination. I again want to thank Senator Neal for expressing her own opinions and for sharing the ways in which she has been treated with similar legislation. And I think that that is something that speaks to why we have to take every opportunity to combat this. And am hopeful that I can not only work alongside her with this bill, but also with the other bills that can help to target discrimination in the workplace so that we can get working families back on their feet, so we can start to invest in our women and minority populations to bring them back and Nevada back stronger, especially after the pandemic. I know there was at least some opposition, which I would implore them today to reach out to me so that we can actually have a conversation about what it is that some of the consternation is over this bill. Definitely want to make sure that there aren't loopholes or that we don't leave folks in a lurch wondering what is permitted and what is not permitted. And so we'll continue to work on some of those definitions, and I would expect an amendment to address some of those concerns. But I want to be very clear about what my intent is with this bill, which is to implement some of the policies that we know can have an impact on the wage gap, and that is something that we absolutely have to do, period. And so I appreciate you being willing to let me take up so much of the committee's time this morning. I think it's an important discussion, and just really do want to thank everyone for being engaged and interested in this topic. So thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. I'll just end by saying I had a friend who was a helicopter pilot in Korea, and he said to me after, the mechanics go through and they check everything before they take off in flight, and he said he always goes behind them and looks at the screws or the washers or whatever. He looks at those little small parts. And I said, why? He said, because those are the ones, if you don't pay attention to them, those are the ones that can bring the bird down. And so this may seem like a small part to some people, but it's the lack of this type of legislation that could bring the plane down. So thank you, Madam Majority Leader. And with that, we will close the hearing on Senate Bill 293. And we'll go to public comment. Broadcast, do we have anybody there?
Thank you, Chair. To speak in public comment, please press *9 now to take your place in the queue. Chair, you have no callers for public comment at this time.
Thank you, ma'am. I just want to thank all the members of the committee for going the extra mile. We usually meet 3 days a week, and this week we're meeting 5. We may have to do that next week, but thank you all for going the extra mile while we try to make sure that we get as many bills heard as possible and get them out of the committee. So your persistence in this matter is well appreciated by me. And so with that, we will call this hearing to a close, and we'll be right back at it 8 o'clock tomorrow. Thanks a lot. We are adjourned.